Some houses have memories. Others have secrets they only whisper. Tonight on NightSleepWhisper, we descend into the depths of Blackwood Manor. For 50 chapters, you will witness the birth of a watcher and the rhythmic ticking of a machine beyond time. Let yourself drift into the flow of the story. Turn off the lights and listen to the sound of silence. Oakmarrow is waiting for you. Arthur stood in front of the wooden gate. The house was grey and very tall. It stood in the middle of a large garden like a tired giant. The grass was long and green, and the trees were full of summer leaves. Arthur held his heavy suitcases. His arms felt a bit weak, but his heart was full of hope. He was 65 years old. After many years of teaching in the noisy city, he wanted a quiet life. This village was perfect for him. It was silent, peaceful, and far away from the crowds. He walked up the stone path to the front door. The wood was dark and felt cold under his hand. He turned his new key in the lock. The door opened slowly. Inside, the air was thick and smelled like old paper and dust. The furniture was covered with white sheets. They looked like ghosts in the dim light of the afternoon. Arthur walked into the living room. He looked at the fireplace. It was made of heavy grey stone. He could see many years of history in the walls. "This is home now," Arthur said to the empty room. His voice sounded clear and strange in the quiet house. He began to work immediately. He moved some boxes and took the sheets off the chairs. He wanted to make the house feel warm and friendly. While he was walking near the large window, he felt something move under his foot. One of the wooden floorboards was not flat. It was loose. Arthur knelt down on the dusty floor. His knees hurt a little, but he was curious. He liked to fix things, and he did not want a broken floor. He used a small metal tool from his bag to lift the edge of the board. The wood made a sharp, snapping sound as it moved. Under the board, there was a lot of dust and some old spiderwebs. In the middle of the dark space, Arthur saw a dark object. He reached in with his hand. His fingers touched something cold and very hard. He pulled it out carefully. It was a very large key. It was made of heavy black iron. It was much bigger than a normal house key. It looked very old, like something from a museum. There was a small piece of old string tied to the top of the key, but there was no note or name. Arthur held the key in his hand. It felt very heavy and solid. He wondered what door it opened. This house had many doors, but he already had the keys for all of them. He looked at the key for a long time. The sun began to go down behind the hills. The shadows in the room grew long and thin. Arthur felt a small shiver. He was happy with his new house, but he felt that the house was hiding a secret. He put the iron key on the wooden table. It made a loud metallic noise that echoed in the empty room. Arthur watched the key in the moonlight. The mystery of his new life was just beginning. Arthur woke up early the next morning. The sun was bright, and the birds were singing in the trees outside his window. He felt a little tired because the bed was new, but he was also excited. He sat at his small kitchen table and drank a cup of hot coffee. The large iron key was still there. It looked very dark against the light wood of the table. Arthur touched it with his finger. The metal was very cold. "Today, I will clean the top of the house," Arthur said to himself. He walked to the back of the hallway. There was a small, narrow door. Behind the door was a set of wooden stairs. They were very old and thin. As Arthur walked up, the wood made a loud, sharp noise under his boots. He reached the attic. The air was very warm and dry. It smelled like old wood and very old clothes. Small pieces of dust danced in the yellow sunlight that came through a tiny window in the roof. The attic was full of things from many years ago. There were boxes of old books, a broken lamp, and some heavy blankets. Arthur started to move the boxes. He wanted to make space for his own things. He moved a large, heavy box of kitchen tools. Behind it, he saw a small chest made of dark wood. It had a metal handle on the top. Arthur sat on the floor and opened the chest. Inside, he found many old newspapers. The dates on the papers were from 30 years ago. He moved the newspapers and found a long roll of yellow paper. It was tied with a piece of blue ribbon. Arthur took the ribbon off and opened the paper carefully on the dusty floor. The paper was very dry and felt like it could break easily. It was a map. Someone had drawn it by hand with a black pen. It was a map of the entire village. Arthur could see the main road, the church with its tall tower, and the river that moved through the valley. The drawing was very beautiful and very detailed. Every house in the village was there. Arthur looked closely at the map. In the corner, near the dark forest, he saw something strange. One house was different from the others. Someone had drawn a thick red circle around it. The red ink was very dark and bold. Beside the house, there were 3 small crosses. Arthur felt a sudden chill, even though the attic was warm. He stood up and walked to the small window. From the top of the house, he could see most of the village. He looked at the map, and then he looked at the real houses below. He followed the road with his eyes. At the very edge of the village, near the start of the woods, he saw a small house with a grey roof. It was the same house from the map. It looked lonely and very quiet. Arthur rolled up the map and put it under his arm. He looked around the attic one more time. He felt that someone had left these things for a reason. The iron key and the map with the red circle were pieces of a puzzle. He did not know the story yet, but he wanted to find the answer. He walked down the noisy stairs, holding the map tightly. His quiet life in the village was already changing. Arthur walked down the hill toward the village center. The morning air was fresh and cool. He needed to buy some food and fresh bread for his breakfast. He found a small shop in the square. Above the door, a sign said "The Bakery." The smell of warm bread was wonderful and made him feel very hungry. He pushed the door open. Inside, the shop was warm and bright. A woman stood behind the counter. She was about 60 years old. She had grey hair and a kind face. She was wearing a clean white apron. She smiled at Arthur when he walked to the counter. "Good morning," she said. "Are you the man who moved into the big house on the hill?" "Yes, I am," Arthur answered. "My name is Arthur. I moved in yesterday." "Welcome to our village, Arthur. I am Martha," the woman said. "It is good to see that house open again. It was empty for such a long time. It is a very big house for only one person." Arthur smiled. "It is big, but I like the quiet. I am busy cleaning the rooms now. I even found some old things in the attic. It seems Mr. Blackwood lived there for a very long time." As soon as Arthur said the name Mr. Blackwood, the air in the room felt different. Martha's smile went away. Her hands, which were holding a metal tray, began to tremble. Suddenly, the tray fell from her hands. 2 loaves of fresh bread rolled across the wooden floor. Martha did not move to pick them up. She looked at Arthur, and her eyes were full of worry. She looked at the street outside the window to see if anyone was watching or listening. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered. Her voice was very low and serious. "You should not speak that name so loudly in this village." Arthur was confused. He looked at her nervous hands. "Why not? He was just the man who lived in the house before me, wasn't he?" Martha leaned over the counter. She looked very nervous. Mr. Blackwood was not a normal man. He was very private. He had many secrets, and some people here did not like his questions. He was looking for something. Arthur. Something very important and hidden. What was he looking for? Arthur asked. He thought about the heavy iron key and the map in his pocket. Martha shook her head. I cannot say more. I have said too much already. Just be careful. Arthur, that house is very old. Sometimes it is better to leave the past alone. Do not dig too deep. She quickly picked up the bread from the floor and put it in a bin. She gave Arthur a new loaf of bread in a brown paper bag. Her hands were still shaking a little. Arthur paid her, but she did not look at his eyes again. She turned around and started working at the back of the shop. Arthur walked out of the bakery. The sun was still bright, but he felt a little cold. He looked at the people walking in the square. They all looked like normal people, but he wondered what they were hiding. Martha's warning stayed in his mind. He had a house, a key, a map, and now, a warning. The mystery was growing larger. Arthur walked through the village square. He saw a small stone building with a wooden sign. The sign said, "Village Library." It looked very old. The windows were small and dark. He decided to go inside. He wanted to know more about Mr. Blackwood and the history of his house on the hill. He felt that the library was the best place to find the truth. Inside, the library was very quiet. There were many tall bookshelves. The air was cool and smelled like old paper. An old woman sat at a desk in the corner. She wore thick glasses and a blue sweater. Her name tag said Mrs. Gable. She looked up when Arthur walked to her desk. She did not smile, but she looked curious. "Good morning," Arthur said quietly. "I am new in town. I live in the Blackwood house on the hill." Mrs. Gable stopped writing. She looked at Arthur for a long time. "The Blackwood house," she repeated. Her voice was thin and dry. "That house has many stories. Are you looking for something specific?" "I want to see the history of the property," Arthur explained. "I want to see the records of the owners from 30 years ago. I am curious about the past and about Mr. Blackwood himself." Mrs. Gable stood up slowly. She walked to the back of the library. Arthur followed her. They went to a small room with many metal cabinets. The room felt cold and a little damp. Mrs. Gable opened a heavy drawer. She looked through many yellow files. Her fingers moved quickly over the papers. Then, she stopped. She looked confused and a little bit worried. "That is very strange," she said. "What is it?" Arthur asked. He leaned forward to see the drawer. "The files for that year are not here," she said. She pulled out a large folder. It was completely empty. "The records from 30 years ago are missing. Someone took them from the library." Arthur looked at the empty folder. Who would take them? This is a public library. Mrs. Gable shook her head. "I do not know. These records are usually very safe. We keep them locked at night. But look here." She pointed to the empty space in the drawer. "The papers for the years before and the years after are all here. Only that specific year is gone. It is like that part of history was erased on purpose." Arthur felt a strange feeling in his stomach. First, Martha was afraid of the name Blackwood. Now, the library records were gone. It was not a coincidence. Someone wanted the past to stay hidden. "Is there any other place to look for information?" Arthur asked. "No," Mrs. Gable said. She looked at the door. "But I remember that year. It was a difficult time for the village. There was a lot of trouble between the people and Mr. Blackwood. Then, one day, he just stopped coming to the village. People said he was ill. But after that, the library records disappeared." Mrs. Gable closed the metal drawer with a firm motion. The sound of the metal hitting the cabinet was loud in the small room. She looked at Arthur with a serious expression. "I think you should be careful, Arthur. Some people in this village want to forget the past. They do not like people who ask questions." Arthur thanked her and walked out. The sun was hot now, but he felt a cold wind. He looked back at the library. It felt like the whole village was keeping a secret. He walked back to his lonely house on the hill, thinking about the empty folder and the missing papers. The walk back to the house on the hill felt longer than usual. Arthur's mind was full of questions. He thought about the empty folder in the library and the fear in Martha's eyes. The village of Oakmarrow looked peaceful with its flowers and stone paths, but Arthur felt that the peace was a mask. He reached his front door and went inside. The house was silent and cool. The iron key still sat on the wooden table. In the afternoon light, the key cast a long, thin shadow across the wood. Arthur decided to make a simple dinner. He boiled some water and made a cup of tea. He ate his bread from the bakery while sitting by the large window in the living room. From there, he could see his entire back garden. The grass was very long, and the old trees reached toward the sky like thin fingers. As the sun went down, the sky turned a deep purple. The garden became a world of dark shapes and long shadows. He was reading a book when he felt a strange sensation. It was a feeling that someone was watching him. He looked up from his book and stared out into the garden. At first, he saw nothing but the trees and the high wooden fence. Then, he noticed something near the corner of the property. A person was standing there. The figure was tall and wore a long, dark coat. The person stood perfectly still near the garden fence, partially hidden by the branches of an old oak tree. They were not looking at the trees or the ground. They were looking directly at the house, directly at Arthur's window. Arthur's heart began to beat faster. He did not move. He watched the figure for a minute, then 2 minutes. The person did not move at all. They looked like a statue in the dark. Arthur wondered if it was a neighbor or perhaps the librarian, but the figure was too tall. He felt a wave of cold fear. Why was someone standing in his garden at night? Arthur stood up. He decided he could not just sit and watch. He walked to the back door. His hands were a little shaky as he turned the handle. He opened the door quickly. The heavy wood made a low, scraping noise against the floor. Arthur stepped out onto the stone porch. The night air was chilly and smelled like damp earth. "Hello," Arthur called out. His voice was loud, but it sounded small in the large, open space. "Who is there? What do you want?" There was no answer. The only sound was the wind moving through the leaves of the trees. Arthur walked a few steps into the grass. The long blades of grass felt wet against his shoes. He looked toward the corner of the fence where the figure had been. The space was empty. The person was gone. Arthur walked all the way to the fence. He looked over the wood, but he saw only the dark woods behind his house. There were no footsteps in the grass and no sound of a person running. It was as if the shadow had simply melted into the night. He stayed outside for a few more minutes, looking into the darkness. He felt a heavy weight of worry in his chest. He went back inside and locked the door with 2 turns of the key. He moved away from the window and closed the thick curtains. That night, Arthur did not sleep well. He kept thinking about the person in the garden. He realized that he was no longer a stranger in a quiet village. He was now part of a mystery that was watching him from the shadows. The next morning, Arthur did not want to go outside. The memory of the shadow in the garden was still fresh in his mind. He felt safer inside the thick stone walls of his house. To keep his mind busy, he decided to look at the boxes of books he had moved from the attic. He sat on the floor of the living room with a large box. Most of the books were very old and covered in a layer of grey dust. He found books about gardening, old poetry, and many books about history. One book was much larger and heavier than the others. It was a history of the county, bound in dark green leather. The gold letters on the front were fading, but Arthur could still read them. He opened the book and began to turn the pages. The paper felt very thin and dry, like a dead leaf. As he reached the middle of the book, he felt something thick between the pages. He turned a page and a small envelope fell out. The envelope was yellow with age. There was no name on the front, but the paper was sealed with a small piece of red wax. Arthur's heart beat faster. He sat back against the sofa and picked up the envelope. He opened it carefully with his pocket knife. Inside, there was a single piece of paper. The handwriting was very small and neat. It was written with a fountain pen in dark blue ink. The truth is not in the words of men. The letter began. The truth is hidden where the earth meets the wall. If you have the iron key, you have the first step. Look under the stone. Do not trust the smiling faces in the square. They are watching the house. They have always been watching. B. Arthur read the letter 3 times. The signature was just the letter B. It had to be Mr. Blackwood. The message was a warning, just like the warning Martha had given him at the bakery. But this letter was more specific. It mentioned the iron key and something under the stone. Arthur looked around the living room. The floor was made of wood, but the fireplace was made of many large, grey stones. He walked over to the fireplace and knelt down. He touched the cold stones one by one. Most of them were very solid and did not move. He looked at the floor near the fireplace. There were 3 large stones that formed a small path toward the kitchen. He thought about the map he found in the attic. The map had 3 small crosses near the house. He realized the crosses were not for the garden. They were for the stones here, inside the house. He tried to push the largest stone with his hands. It did not move. He used his metal tool to press against the edge of the second stone. It was also stuck. Finally, he reached the 3rd stone. This one was smaller and looked a bit darker than the others. When Arthur pressed his weight against it, he heard a low, grinding noise. The stone moved just a little bit. Arthur felt a mixture of fear and excitement. He was close to finding something, but he also remembered the warning in the letter. They are watching. He looked toward the window. The curtains were closed, but he still felt a pair of eyes on his back. He was no longer just a retired teacher. He was now a man with a dangerous secret. Arthur decided to leave the house for a while. He needed to see the people of the village with his own eyes. He wanted to know who the smiling faces from the letter were. There was a public meeting at the town hall that evening. The town hall was a large building made of red bricks in the center of the village square. He walked inside. The room was large and full of people sitting on wooden chairs. Arthur found a seat in the back row. He wanted to watch and listen without being noticed. In the front of the room, there was a long wooden table. A man with a very expensive blue suit and short grey hair was sitting there. This was Mayor Miller. He looked like a very important and powerful man. Next to him sat a man with a white shirt and silver glasses. Arthur recognized him from a sign in the square. He was the village doctor. Before the meeting began, Arthur noticed something strange. The mayor and the doctor were standing near a side door, away from the crowd. They were talking in very low voices. They did not look happy. The mayor was leaning close to the doctor. His face was a little red, and his eyes looked sharp and angry. The doctor was shaking his head slowly. He looked tired and a bit afraid. Arthur could not hear their words, but he could see their movements. The mayor pointed his finger at the doctor's chest to emphasize a point. The doctor looked away, staring at the floor. It was clear that they were having a private argument. It did not look like a conversation about village business. It looked personal and very tense. Suddenly, the mayor turned around. He saw the people in the room. His face changed instantly. The anger disappeared. He wore a big, friendly smile. He walked to the front table and hit a small wooden hammer against the wood to start the meeting. The sound of the hammer was loud and sharp in the quiet room. "Good evening, friends," the mayor said. His voice was deep and warm. "We are here to talk about the future of our beautiful village. We want to build new roads and a new park for everyone to enjoy. We want progress." The people in the room hit their hands together to show they were happy. They were all smiling. But Arthur did not clap. He looked at the doctor. The doctor was sitting very still. He was looking down at his notebook. He did not look at the crowd. And he did not smile. Arthur thought about the letter in the book. Do not trust the smiling faces. The mayor had a very bright smile. But Arthur felt that the man was wearing a mask. He wondered if the new projects were the reason why the library records from 30 years ago were missing. He felt that the mayor and the doctor were connected to the secret of Mr. Blackwood. The meeting continued for an hour. The mayor talked about money and building plans. When the meeting finally ended, the mayor walked through the room. He shook hands with many people. He stopped in front of Arthur. "You are the new man in the Blackwood house," the mayor said. He held Arthur's hand very tightly. His grip was too strong. "I hope you are enjoying our quiet village, Arthur. It is a very interesting place." Arthur answered slowly. The mayor's smile was wide, but his eyes were cold and stayed fixed on Arthur's face. "Be careful with that old house. It is full of dust and bad memories. Sometimes it is better to look at the future and forget the past." The mayor moved on to the next person. Arthur felt a cold shiver on his neck. He knew the mayor was not just talking about cleaning a house. He was giving him a warning. Arthur walked home quickly. The moon was high in the sky, and the trees made long, dark shapes on the road. He could still feel the strength of the mayor's hand on his. The mayor's smile was friendly, but his eyes were like ice. Arthur felt that he was being watched. He did not look back, but he walked faster until he reached the wooden gate of his house. The house looked different in the dark. It looked like it was waiting for him. Arthur went to the front door and opened it. He stepped into the hallway and reached for the light. He pressed the switch, and the yellow light filled the room. Everything looked normal at first. His books were on the shelf. His coat was hanging on the door. He walked into the kitchen to make a glass of water. Suddenly, he stopped. He felt a cold wind on his face. The kitchen was usually the warmest room in the house, but now it was freezing. He looked toward the back of the room. The large window above the sink was broken. Small pieces of glass lay across the floor and inside the sink. They looked like tiny, sharp diamonds in the light. Arthur did not move. He listened carefully. The house was silent, but the wind moved through the broken glass. He looked at the floor. There were no muddy footprints. There was no mess. Arthur's heart started to beat very fast. He turned his head toward the wooden kitchen table. That was where he had left the large iron key. He remembered placing it right next to his empty coffee cup before he left for the meeting. The table was empty. The iron key was gone. Arthur ran to the table and moved his hands over the wood. He looked under the chairs. He checked the floor near the broken glass. He even looked inside his kitchen drawers. But the key was not there. Arthur looked around the rest of the kitchen. He had a small bowl on the counter where he kept some coins and his extra house keys. The money was still there. He had a small radio on the shelf. That was still there, too. The person who came into his house did not want his money or his things. They only wanted the heavy iron key. He felt a wave of fear wash over him. Someone had watched him leave for the village meeting. Someone knew he was away. They had broken into his home, taken the key, and left everything else alone. It was a clear message. They were telling him that his house was not a safe place. Arthur went to the closet and found a large piece of thick cardboard and some tape. He walked to the broken window. His hands were shaking as he fixed the cardboard over the hole. He wanted to block the cold air, but he knew he could not block the danger. He thought about the mayor and the doctor. He thought about Martha's warning. He realized that the iron key was more important than he thought. If someone was willing to break a window to steal it, then the key was a threat to them. He sat down at the table and stared at the empty spot where the key used to be. He felt very alone in the big, grey house. He had lost the key, but he still had the map and the letter. He decided that he would not be afraid. He would find out what that key opened, even if he had to find the key all over again. The rain started as a light tap against the cardboard on the kitchen window. Soon, it became a heavy storm. The sky was completely black. Large flashes of lightning lit up the living room for a second. Then it was dark again. Arthur sat in the living room with a warm blanket. He felt the cold air moving through the house. He was thinking about the stolen key and the broken glass. He felt very unsafe in his own home. Suddenly, there was a sound at the front door. Someone was hitting the wood with their hand. It was not a soft sound. It was firm and steady. Arthur stood up quickly. He felt a sharp feeling of worry in his chest. He walked to the door and looked through the small glass hole. Outside, a man was standing in the pouring rain. He was wearing a long coat and holding his head down to protect himself from the wind. Arthur opened the door slowly. The wind blew a cloud of rain into the hallway. It was the doctor. His silver glasses were covered in water, and he looked very cold. "Arthur," the doctor said. His voice was shaking. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your evening. My car stopped on the road just down the hill. It will not start, and the rain is too heavy to walk all the way back to the village. May I use your telephone?" Arthur looked at the doctor's wet clothes. He remembered the doctor and the mayor arguing at the meeting. He did not really trust the man, but he could not leave him outside in a storm. He was a kind man, and it was a very bad night. "Please, come in, doctor," Arthur said. "The telephone is in the hallway, but I'm not sure if it is working in this storm. You are very wet. I will get you a dry towel." The doctor walked inside. He left a trail of water on the wooden floor. Arthur went to the bathroom and brought back a large white towel. The doctor took it and began to dry his face and hair. He sat down in a large chair near the fireplace. He looked around the room with a curious expression. His eyes stopped on the kitchen door. He could see the cardboard over the broken window from where he sat. "The weather is very bad tonight," the doctor said quietly. He looked at Arthur. "It is a dangerous night to be alone in such a big, old house. I see you had some trouble with your window." Arthur did not want to talk about the window or the stolen key. "It was an accident," Arthur said. He went to the kitchen to make some hot tea. He stood by the stove and watched the water. He felt very nervous. He wondered if the doctor's car really broke down. It was very strange that the doctor appeared at his door just hours after the key was stolen. He looked at the empty table. He felt that the doctor was watching him from the other room. The house felt very small with the two men inside, and the sound of the rain against the roof was like a drum that would not stop. Arthur brought 2 cups of hot tea into the living room. The steam rose from the cups in the cool air. The doctor was sitting deep in the armchair. He had the white towel around his neck. He looked older and more tired than he did at the village meeting. His hands were resting on his knees. They were thin hands with long, pale fingers. "Here is some tea," Arthur said. He put the cup on a small table near the doctor. "Thank you, Arthur," the doctor replied. He took a slow drink. "You are a kind man. This house, it is very quiet. It has a heavy feeling, doesn't it? Like it is holding its breath." Arthur sat in the chair across from him. "It is just an old house, doctor. It only feels heavy because of the storm." They did not talk much after that. The only sound was the rain hitting the roof and the wind moving the branches of the trees against the walls. The doctor leaned his head back against the chair. His eyes looked heavy and red. After a few minutes, his breathing became slow and deep. The doctor was asleep. The warmth of the room and the hot tea had finally made him relax. Arthur watched him. He felt like a detective watching a suspect. He thought about the stolen iron key. He wondered if the key was inside the doctor's wet coat right now. He wanted to look, but he did not want to wake the man. He did not want to be caught searching a guest's pockets. The doctor moved slightly in his sleep. His body shifted to the side. A small, square object slipped out of his side pocket. It fell silently onto the soft rug. The doctor did not wake up. He continued to sleep with his mouth slightly open. Arthur knelt down on the floor. He picked up the object carefully. It was a photograph. It was black and white, and the edges were a little yellow with age. He held it close to the lamp so he could see it better. In the photo, there were two men. They were standing in front of a building that looked like a greenhouse. One man was the doctor. He was much younger, but Arthur recognized the shape of his nose and his glasses. The other man was tall and thin. He had a serious face and dark, deep eyes. He was wearing a heavy coat and holding a large iron key, the same key that was stolen from Arthur's kitchen. Arthur felt a shock. This had to be Mr. Blackwood. In the photo, the doctor had his arm around Mr. Blackwood's shoulder. They were smiling. They looked like very close friends. Why did the doctor lie at the meeting? He had acted like he barely knew the history of the house. Now, Arthur had proof that the doctor and Mr. Blackwood were friends. Arthur carefully put the photo back on the rug exactly where it had fallen. He did not want the doctor to know he had seen it. He sat back in his chair and waited for the morning. His mind was racing with new secrets. The rain stopped before the sun came up. The sky was now a light grey color. Arthur did not sleep in his bed. He stayed in the living room chair and watched the doctor. When the clock on the wall showed 7 o'clock, the doctor moved. He opened his eyes and looked around the room. He looked confused for a moment. Then he saw Arthur and remembered where he was. "Good morning, Arthur," the doctor said. His voice was dry. "I'm sorry I fell asleep in your chair. I was very tired from the long day." "It is okay," Arthur said. "The storm was very loud. You can go to the guest room upstairs to wash your face. I will make some breakfast." The doctor stood up slowly. He picked up his wet coat and his leather bag. He walked up the stairs. Arthur went into the kitchen. He listened to the sound of the doctor's footsteps on the floor above him. He heard the door of the guest room close. Then he heard the sound of water running in the bathroom. Arthur waited for a minute. He felt a strong curiosity. He walked quietly to the stairs and went up. He did not go to the bathroom. He went into the guest room. The room was small. It had a bed, a lamp, and a very old wooden desk in the corner. This desk was original to the house. It belonged to Mr. Blackwood. The doctor's leather bag was sitting on the bed. It was open. Arthur saw some medical papers and a stethoscope. He did not touch the bag. He turned his attention to the wooden desk. He had looked at this desk when he first moved in. He remembered that all the drawers were empty and open. Arthur reached out and pulled the handle of the top drawer. It opened easily. It was empty. He tried the middle drawer. It also opened. Then he tried the bottom drawer. He pulled the handle, but the drawer did not move. He pulled harder. The wood was solid. It was locked. Arthur was surprised. He was sure this drawer was open 2 days ago. He looked at the keyhole. It was small and made of bright brass. It looked very clean, as if someone had used it recently. Arthur realized that the doctor must have a key for this desk. Why did the doctor lock a drawer in Arthur's house? He looked at the top of the desk. There was a small gap between the wood and the drawer. He saw a tiny piece of white paper sticking out. He tried to pull it, but it was stuck inside the locked space. He could see a few words written in black ink. The words said, "Village Land," and "Blackwood." Arthur's heart began to beat fast. The doctor was hiding documents in Arthur's own house. He was not just a guest. He was using the house to keep secrets. Arthur heard the water stop in the bathroom. He quickly walked out of the room and went back downstairs. He stood in the kitchen and started to cook some eggs. His hands were a little bit shaky. He realized that the doctor was not just a friend of Mr. Blackwood. He was part of the mystery. The locked drawer was proof that the doctor had a secret interest in the Blackwood property. Arthur needed to find a way to open that drawer. But first, he had to act like a normal host. He heard the doctor coming down the stairs. Arthur put a smile on his face, but his mind was already planning his next move. The kitchen was bright with morning light. The smell of hot eggs and coffee filled the air. Arthur put a plate in front of the doctor. He also put a cup of black coffee on the table. The doctor looked at the food, but he did not pick up his fork. He looked very uncomfortable. He kept looking at the hallway that led to the stairs. He seemed worried about his bag and the guest room. "You look tired, Doctor," Arthur said. He sat down across from him. "Did you sleep well after the storm?" "Yes, thank you," the doctor said. His voice was very low. He took a small sip of the coffee. "It is a very quiet room. I am grateful for your help." Arthur decided to be bold. He thought about the photograph he saw on the rug. "I was cleaning the living room earlier," Arthur began. "I found a small photograph on the floor. It must have fallen from your pocket. It showed two men in front of a greenhouse. One of them looked like you." The doctor's hand stopped moving. He put the coffee cup down on the wooden table. The sound of the cup hitting the wood was sharp. He looked at Arthur. His eyes were no longer kind. They were cold and hard. He did not say anything for a long time. The clock on the wall made a steady, slow sound that felt very loud in the silence. "That was a long time ago," the doctor said finally. "Mr. Blackwood was a patient of mine. Nothing more. He looked like a friend in the photo." Arthur said, "You had your arm around him. Why did you not mention him at the village meeting?" The mayor seemed to think no one knew him well. The doctor stood up suddenly. He did not finish his breakfast. He walked to the hallway and grabbed his wet coat. He looked very angry, but he also looked afraid. He did not look like a powerful village doctor anymore. He looked like a man with a heavy weight on his shoulders. "Mr. Blackwood is dead, Arthur," the doctor said. He spoke quickly. "The past is finished. You are a new man here. You should enjoy your garden and your books. Do not ask about things that do not concern you. It is better for everyone." "But someone broke my window," Arthur said. "Someone stole an iron key from this table. Was that also for the best?" The doctor froze at the door. He turned his head halfway. "I do not know anything about a key," he said. "And I do not know anything about your window. I think my car is dry enough now. I must go to the clinic. People are waiting for me." The doctor opened the front door and walked out. He did not say goodbye. Arthur watched from the window as the doctor walked down the hill toward his car. The doctor's steps were fast and uneven. Arthur looked at the breakfast on the table. It was cold now. He felt a deep sense of danger. The doctor's cold answer was a clear sign. There was a secret in this village, and the doctor was right in the middle of it. Arthur was now sure that the locked drawer in the guest room held the answers he needed. Arthur watched the doctor's car disappear around the bend of the road. The house felt very large and empty again. He looked at the wooden desk upstairs in his mind. He wanted to break the lock, but he did not have the right tools yet. He needed more information first. He put on his coat and picked up his hat. He decided to visit the one place where the history of the village was written in stone. The village cemetery was located behind the old church. It was surrounded by a high wall made of grey stones. The grass was short and very green from the night of rain. Arthur pushed open the heavy iron gate. It made a long, low sound against the stone path. He walked slowly between the rows of graves. Some stones were very old and covered in green moss. Others were new and bright. He walked toward the back of the cemetery, near a large willow tree. The branches of the tree moved softly in the wind. There, in a quiet corner, he found what he was looking for. It was a simple headstone made of dark granite. It was clean and did not have any moss on it. The letters were carved deep into the stone. Elias Blackwood. Under the name, there were 2 dates. Arthur knelt down to see them clearly. The date of birth was a long time ago. Then he looked at the date of death. It said, October 14th, 1996. Arthur stared at the numbers. He took a small notebook out of his pocket. He turned the pages to the notes he made at the library. Mrs. Gable, the librarian, told him that the records from 30 years ago were missing. When he checked the empty folder, the year on the label was 1996. The same day. Arthur whispered. It was not just the same year. Mr. Blackwood died on the exact same day the history of the village was erased from the library. Arthur felt a cold wind move past him. He looked around the cemetery. It was a beautiful, peaceful place, but now it felt like a place of secrets. He thought about Mr. Blackwood. The man lived in the house on the hill. He had a friend who was a doctor. He had a daughter, Martha, who was afraid to speak his name. And he died on the very day someone decided to hide the village's past. Arthur looked at the ground near the grave. There were no flowers, but the earth looked flat and neat. He wondered if Mr. Blackwood died of old age or if something else happened. The doctor said he was a patient. Did the doctor know the truth about that day? Arthur stood up and brushed the dirt from his trousers. He felt a new sense of purpose. He was not just a curious neighbor anymore. He was looking for the truth about a man's life and a man's death. He walked back to the iron gate. As he left the cemetery, he saw a black car parked a little distance away on the road. The windows were dark, and he could not see the driver. Arthur did not stop. He walked back toward the village. He knew he was being watched, but he did not care. The date on the stone was the key to everything. October 14th was the day the mystery began, and Arthur was going to find out why. Arthur walked back to his house. The walk felt very long. He kept looking behind him to see if the black car was following. The road was empty now, but he did not feel safe. He reached his front door and went inside quickly. He locked the door and leaned against it. His heart was beating fast. He looked at his notes again. October 14th, 1996. That date was the center of everything. An hour later, there was a soft knock at the door. Arthur jumped. He went to the window and looked out. It was Martha, the baker. She was wearing a thick brown coat and holding a small paper bag. She looked left and right before Arthur opened the door. "Arthur, can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was a whisper. "Of course. Martha, please," Arthur said. They went into the kitchen. Martha saw the cardboard on the window. She sighed and put the bag of bread on the table. She sat down in the wooden chair. Her face looked very pale. "I heard about the window," Martha said. "The village is small. News moves fast here. They are trying to scare you. Arthur, this is just the beginning." Arthur sat across from her. The key is gone. Martha. Someone broke in while I was at the meeting. And I went to the cemetery today. I saw the date on your father's grave. He died on the same day the library records disappeared. Why is that date so important? Martha's hands began to shake. She hid them under the table. My father was a good man. But he was stubborn. He found out something about the land. He believed the mayor and the other council members were stealing money from the village. He was going to a big meeting in the next town to show his evidence. But he never arrived. He died that morning. The doctor said he was ill. Arthur said. That is what the doctor told everyone. Martha replied. Her eyes were full of tears. But my father was healthy the day before. After he died, the mayor took control of everything. The records, the house, the money. I was young and afraid. They told me to be quiet, or I would lose my job and my home. She leaned forward and touched Arthur's arm. Her hand was cold. You must stop. Arthur, you are just one man. The mayor has power. The doctor has secrets. They will do anything to keep the past hidden. They took your key because they think it opens the safe in the old greenhouse. They want the papers my father kept. But I found a second key. Martha. Arthur said. He did not tell her where it was yet. Martha stood up quickly. She looked terrified. Do not tell me. I do not want to know. If I know, I am in danger too. I came here to tell you to leave. Sell the house. Go back to the city. It is not safe here for a man who asks questions. She walked to the door. She did not look back. Please, Arthur, for your own life, leave it alone. She opened the door and disappeared into the evening fog. Arthur stood in his kitchen, alone again. He looked at the bread she left. He was afraid, but he was also angry. They had scared Martha for 30 years. He decided he would not let them scare him. Arthur did not sleep well after Martha left. Her words were like heavy stones in his mind. He sat in his chair and watched the sun come up. The light was pale and thin. He knew the mayor and the doctor were powerful. But he also knew that secrets were like shadows. When you shine a light on them, they disappear. Arthur was ready to be that light. He went out into the back garden. The grass was wet with morning dew. The air was cold, and a light mist moved between the trees. Arthur walked to the old oak tree near the fence. This was the place where he saw the shadow a few nights ago. He looked at the ground, but the rain had washed away any tracks. He looked up at the branches. There, hanging from a thick limb, was an old wooden birdhouse. It was painted white, but the paint was peeling and grey now. No birds lived there anymore. It looked lonely and forgotten. Arthur remembered the map he found in the attic. There was a small mark near the garden trees. He reached up, but the birdhouse was too high. He went to the small shed near the house and brought out a wooden ladder. He placed the ladder against the tree. It felt a bit shaky, but Arthur climbed up carefully. His hands felt cold against the rough wood of the tree. When he reached the birdhouse, he saw that it was not a normal house for birds. The hole for the birds was blocked with a piece of wood from the inside. Arthur touched the roof of the birdhouse. It felt loose. He lifted the wooden top. It moved easily. Inside, there was no nest and no feathers. Instead, there was a small piece of blue cloth. Arthur reached in and pulled the cloth out. It was heavy. He unwrapped the cloth and his eyes grew wide. Inside the cloth was a small silver key. This key was very different from the large iron key that was stolen. It was small, bright, and very clean. It looked like a key for a jewelry box or a private drawer. Arthur held it up to the morning sun. The silver metal caught the light and sparkled. He felt a sudden burst of energy. The people who broke his window thought they had won. They thought they had taken the only key. They did not know about this one. What do you open? Arthur asked quietly. He thought about the wooden desk in the guest room upstairs. He thought about the locked drawer where the doctor was hiding papers. Could this small silver key be the way to open it? Or perhaps it opened something else entirely. He put the silver key into his pocket and climbed down the ladder. He felt like he was in a race. The mayor and the doctor were watching him, but he was finding the pieces of the puzzle one by one. He took the ladder back to the shed and went into the house. He locked the back door and leaned against it. He could feel the small silver key against his leg. It was a small weapon, but it was a powerful one. He was ready to find the next secret. Arthur sat at the kitchen table. He held the small silver key in his hand. It was beautiful and bright. He felt a little bit of hope. He took the old map out of his pocket and laid it flat on the table. The red circle was still there. It marked a house near the woods. But there was another mark further down the path. It was a small drawing of a building with many windows. Next to it, someone had written the word blue. Arthur knew this place. It was the old greenhouse. It was on the edge of the village, far away from the other houses. He decided to go there immediately. He put the silver key in his pocket and put on his heavy coat. The sun was behind some clouds now. The day was grey and cool. He walked down the hill and followed the narrow path into the woods. The trees were thick and dark. He walked for 20 minutes. Finally, he saw it. The greenhouse was standing in a small field of tall grass. The frame of the building was painted a deep, dark blue. Many of the glass windows were covered in green moss and grey dust. Some of the windows were broken. It looked like a place that nobody had visited for many years. Arthur felt a little bit nervous. He looked around the field. He did not see any cars or any people. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees. He walked to the front of the greenhouse. There was a large wooden door. Arthur reached out and touched the handle. He wanted to see if it was open, but the door did not move. He looked at the lock. It was not an old iron lock like the ones in his house. It was a new, shiny silver padlock. It looked very modern. It did not match the old, broken building. This is strange, Arthur said to himself. If the greenhouse was abandoned, why was there a new lock on the door? This meant someone was using the building recently. Or, someone wanted to keep people out of the building. He took the small silver key out of his pocket. He tried to put it into the padlock. The key was too small. It did not fit the lock. Arthur felt a little bit of disappointment. But then he remembered the map. The map showed that the greenhouse was important. He walked around the building. He looked through the dusty glass windows. Inside, he saw many old metal tables. There were many empty flower pots on the floor. Everything was covered in dust. But in the middle of the room, there was something different. There was a small wooden table that looked very clean. On top of the table was a small box made of dark wood. Arthur's heart jumped. The silver key in his pocket was exactly the same size as a lock for a box like that. He needed to get inside. He looked at the broken windows, but they were too high for him to climb. He needed a plan. He also knew he had to be fast. If the padlock was new, the owner might come back soon. Arthur stayed in the tall grass and watched the blue greenhouse. He was close to the truth, but the new lock was a dangerous sign. Arthur decided he could not stay at the greenhouse any longer. The new silver padlock was a warning. It meant the mayor or the doctor, or perhaps someone else, visited this place often. He turned away from the blue building and walked back toward the narrow forest path. The sky was getting darker now. The clouds were heavy and grey. The wind moved through the tall trees, making the leaves whisper and shake. He walked quickly. His boots made a soft sound on the damp earth. After 5 minutes of walking, Arthur stopped. He stood perfectly still. He thought he heard another sound. It was not the wind, and it was not a bird. It was the sound of a heavy step on a dry branch. The sound was behind him. Arthur did not turn around immediately. He waited. The forest was silent for a moment. Then, he heard it again. Someone was walking behind him, and they were trying to be quiet. Every time Arthur took a step, the person took a step. When Arthur stopped, the person stopped. Arthur's heart began to beat very fast. He felt a cold sweat on his forehead. He was a retired teacher, not a soldier. He did not know how to fight, but he knew how to hide. He saw a very large oak tree a few meters ahead. Its trunk was wide and covered in thick, dark bark. He started to run. He did not run toward the village. He ran into the thicker part of the woods. He reached the oak tree and jumped behind it. He pressed his back against the rough wood. He tried to breathe slowly and quietly. He held his breath and listened. The footsteps became louder. They were coming closer to the tree. Arthur closed his eyes. He thought about the small silver key in his pocket. He felt like he was holding a piece of a dangerous fire. The person stopped just on the other side of the tree. Arthur could hear the sound of someone breathing. It was heavy and slow. Then, the person spoke. The voice was low and deep. "I know you are here, Arthur." The voice said, "You are looking for things that do not belong to you. You are making a very big mistake." Arthur recognized the voice. It was not the mayor, and it was not the doctor. It was a voice he had heard at the village meeting. It belonged to the man who stood by the door, the mayor's assistant. Arthur did not move. He did not say a word. He stayed in the shadow of the oak tree. After a long minute, he heard the footsteps again. This time, they were moving away. The sound of the steps became softer and softer until there was only the sound of the wind. Arthur waited for 10 more minutes. He was shaking a little from the cold and the fear. When he finally looked out from behind the tree, the woods were empty. He ran the rest of the way back to his house. He did not look back. He realized now that he was not just being watched. He was being hunted. The secret of the blue greenhouse was much bigger than a few old papers. Arthur reached his house and locked every door. His heart was still racing from the encounter in the woods. He sat in the dark for a long time. He did not turn on the lights because he did not want anyone to know where he was in the house. He felt like a prisoner in his own home. However, the next morning, he found a white envelope on his front porch. It was not a threat. It was an invitation. The letter was written on very expensive paper. It said, "Dear Arthur, please join me for dinner tonight at 8 o'clock. We have much to discuss regarding your new home. Sincerely, Mayor Miller." Arthur did not want to go. He remembered the cold eyes of the mayor and the assistant in the woods. But he knew he could not say no. If he stayed home, he was a target. If he went to the dinner, he might learn something new. He put on his best suit and walked toward the center of the village. The mayor's house was the largest building in Oakmarrow. It was made of white stone and had a large balcony. When Arthur arrived, a servant opened the door and led him to a large dining room. The table was covered with a white cloth, expensive silver plates, and tall candles. The mayor was already sitting at the head of the table. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Arthur, thank you for coming," the mayor said. "Please, sit down. Eat. The food is very good." The meal began. They ate soup and roasted meat. For the first 30 minutes, the mayor talked about the weather and the village history. He was very polite. But then, the conversation changed. The mayor put down his fork and looked directly at Arthur. So, Arthur, the mayor began, how is the Blackwood house? It is a very old place. Many people say it is too difficult for one man to manage. Have you found anything interesting in the walls? Any old papers or perhaps old keys? Arthur felt a chill. He took a slow sip of his water. It is a dusty house. Mr. Mayor, I am mostly cleaning and painting. I have not found much of anything. The mayor leaned forward. The candlelight made his face look sharp and yellow. Are you sure? Mr. Blackwood was a man who liked to hide things. He was not a very honest man. If you find anything, you should bring it to me. As the mayor, I must protect the history of this village. I understand, Arthur said. He tried to keep his voice steady. But why are you so interested in a few old things? The mayor's face turned a little red. He stopped smiling. Because some things are dangerous. Arthur, some things can hurt the reputation of good people. I want to make sure you are safe. A man who knows too much can have many accidents. The room became very silent. Arthur could hear the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. He realized the dinner was not a friendly meeting. It was a trial. The mayor was testing him. He wanted to know how much Arthur knew. Arthur finished his meal quickly. He wanted to leave this beautiful, cold house. He felt that the walls were listening to every word. The dinner was finally over. Arthur stood up from the table. He felt like he had been sitting in a cold room for hours. His stomach felt heavy. But not from the food. It was the heavy weight of the mayor's words. He wanted to get away from the sharp candlelight and the mayor's cold, frozen smile. Thank you for the meal, Mr. Mayor, Arthur said politely. It is late, and I have a long walk back to the hill. The mayor stayed in his chair. He picked up his glass of wine and looked at the red liquid. Of course, Arthur. We will speak again soon. I am sure of it. My assistant will show you to the door. The tall man in the dark suit appeared from the shadows of the dining room. He did not say a word. He just pointed toward the long hallway. Arthur followed him. The hallway was very long and filled with expensive objects. There were tall vases from other countries and heavy gold mirrors. As they walked, Arthur looked at the paintings on the wall. Most of them were portraits of the mayor's family. There were men in old uniforms and women in long silk dresses. They all looked very serious and very rich. But near the end of the hallway, close to the front door, Arthur saw a painting that was different. He stopped walking. The assistant stopped too and looked at him. His eyes were hard. Arthur did not care. He stared at the painting. It was a small painting in a simple black frame. The colors were bright and fresh. It showed a beautiful building made of glass with a deep blue frame. It was the greenhouse. But in this painting, the greenhouse was not broken. The glass was clean and sparkling in the sun. There were bright red flowers growing inside. It looked perfect. It looked like a place of life and beauty. Arthur looked at the corner of the painting. There was a date written in small black numbers. 2025. Arthur felt his breath catch in his throat. This painting was not old. It was painted very recently. When he visited the greenhouse yesterday, it looked like a ruin. It was covered in moss and dust. But this painting showed it as a new, working building. This is a nice painting, Arthur said, trying to keep his voice calm. Is this a place in our village? The assistant stepped closer. He moved between Arthur and the painting. It is just a picture. Arthur, the mayor likes art. It is time for you to go. Arthur nodded and walked out of the front door. The cool night air hit his face. He walked fast, his heart pounding against his ribs. He knew now that the greenhouse was not just an old memory from 1996. The mayor had a new painting of it from this year. Why would the mayor have a new painting of an abandoned building? Perhaps it was not abandoned. Perhaps the new projects the mayor talked about at the meeting were happening inside those blue walls. Arthur realized the mystery was not just about the past. It was about something happening right now. He reached the gate and looked back at the large white house. Every window was dark except for the hallway where the blue greenhouse hung on the wall like a trophy. Arthur returned home, but he did not go to bed. He sat in the dark living room, near the window. He did not turn on any lights. He did not want to be a target again. He watched the road, but it was empty. The village was asleep. The moon was high and bright, casting a silver light over the long grass of his garden. Arthur's mind was moving fast. He thought about the painting in the mayor's house. The date 2025 changed everything. It meant the greenhouse was still important. He looked at his watch. It was midnight. The house was perfectly still. Arthur felt a strange urge to look toward the field at the edge of his property. From his upstairs bedroom window, he had a clear view of the valley. He stood up and walked quietly up the stairs. He went into his room and did not turn on the lamp. He walked to the window and pushed the curtain aside just a few centimeters. At first, he saw only the dark shapes of the trees. The woods looked like a black wall. But then, he saw a small spark of light. It was far away, near the place where the blue greenhouse stood. The light was moving. It was the narrow, bright beam of a flashlight. Arthur held his breath. The light moved across the glass walls of the greenhouse. It stopped for a moment. Then it moved inside. Someone was walking through the abandoned building at midnight. The light was steady. It was not the light of a person exploring. It was the light of someone who knew exactly where they were going. "Who is there?" Arthur whispered. He saw a second light appear. Now there were two people. They were moving things inside the greenhouse. Even from far away, Arthur could hear the faint sound of metal hitting metal. It was a low, ringing sound that traveled through the quiet night air. The lights stayed inside the greenhouse for 10 minutes. Then, suddenly, they went out. The field was dark again. Arthur waited. A few minutes later, he heard the low sound of a car engine. It was far away, but the sound was deep and powerful. He saw two small red lights moving away on the dirt track that led to the main road. It was a car with no headlights on. They were trying to leave the area without being seen. Arthur felt a cold shiver. The mayor's assistant had followed him in the woods. The mayor had a new painting of the greenhouse. And now, people were visiting the ruins in the middle of the night. He realized that the safe in the greenhouse that Martha mentioned was not just full of old papers. There was something else happening. He looked at the small silver key on his bedside table. It caught the moonlight and seemed to glow. He knew what he had to do. He could not wait for the morning. He had to see what was inside that greenhouse before the mayor decided to finish his project. Arthur grabbed his heavy coat and his own small flashlight. He was terrified, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He walked down the stairs and out into the cold night. Arthur walked through the tall grass. The grass was wet and cold against his legs. He kept his flashlight turned off. He did not want the people in the car to see him. The moon gave enough light to see the path. The trees were like big, dark shadows around him. He finally reached the blue greenhouse. It looked even bigger and more frightening in the middle of the night. He walked to the front door. The new silver padlock was there. It was locked tight. Arthur did not have the key for this lock. He walked around the side of the building. He looked at the glass windows. Most of them were too high. But near the back, he found a small window that was already broken. The hole was large enough for a man to move through. Arthur put his flashlight in his pocket. He climbed through the broken window carefully. He did not want the glass to cut his skin. He moved slowly. He landed on the floor inside. It was very dark and very quiet. He could hear his own heart beating fast. He waited for a minute to listen. There was no one else inside. He turned on his flashlight. The beam of light was small but bright. The inside of the greenhouse was full of old, dead plants. The air was dry and smelled like dust. Arthur walked toward the center of the room. He saw the wooden table again. It was the only clean thing in the room. He looked at the floor around the table. The floor was made of old wooden boards. Arthur knelt down on the dusty wood. He moved his light over the floor. He saw that the dust was not thick here. Someone had been standing here recently. There were marks from heavy boots. He pushed against one of the boards with his hand. It did not move. He pushed the next one. This board felt loose. He used his fingers to pull at the edge of the board. The wood made a low, rubbing sound against the other boards. He lifted it up and set it aside. Under the board, there was a dark hole in the earth. Arthur moved his flashlight to see inside. Inside the hole, he saw a metal box. It was not a small box. It was a large, heavy safe. It was made of gray steel. On the front of the safe, there was a round metal dial with many numbers. It looked very strong and very old. Arthur felt a cold shiver. This was the safe Martha mentioned. This was what the mayor and the doctor were looking for. But Arthur did not have the code. He looked closer at the steel. There was a small mark on the top of the safe. It was the letter B. It was the same B from the letter in the history book. This was Mr. Blackwood's secret. Arthur knew he had to find the numbers to open it. He felt that the answer was back at the house, perhaps hidden in the things he already found. He heard the wind move against the glass windows. It sounded like a low groan. He quickly put the wooden board back and stood up. He had to leave before the people with the flashlights returned. Arthur stared at the grey steel safe. It looked impossible to open. He moved his flashlight around the small, dark hole in the earth. The beam of light hit something else. It was near the side of the safe, pressed against the cold dirt. It was a small package wrapped in clear plastic. Arthur reached into the hole. The earth felt damp and smelled like old rain. He pulled the package out. The plastic was covered in dust, but it was dry inside. He sat back on his heels and unwrapped it carefully. Inside the plastic was a small book. It was a journal with a cover made of dark, brown leather. The leather was old and had many small cracks. He opened the first page. The handwriting was the same small, neat script from the letter he found in the history book. At the top of the page, it said, "Property of Elias Blackwood. Private." Arthur's heart was beating fast. He knew he should not stay in the greenhouse. It was dangerous. But he could not stop himself from looking at the pages. He turned a few more pages. The journal was full of dates and names. He saw the name of the doctor. He saw the name of the mayor. Next to the names, there were many numbers and notes about village land and bank transfers. Suddenly, Arthur heard a noise outside. It was the sound of a dry leaf moving against the glass. He froze. He turned off his flashlight immediately. The greenhouse became completely black. He stayed very still on the floor. He did not breathe. He listened with all his energy. Was it just the wind? Or was the man in the dark suit back? The silence lasted for a long time. Arthur waited for 5 minutes, but he heard nothing else. He knew he had to leave now. He could not take the safe, but he could take the journal. He put the leather book inside his heavy coat. He tucked the plastic back into the hole and moved the wooden board back into its place. He made sure the dust looked natural. He crawled back through the broken window. The night air felt like ice on his face. He did not use his flashlight. He walked through the tall grass and into the woods, moving as fast as he could. He did not follow the main path. He walked between the trees, trying to stay in the deepest shadows. When he finally reached his house, he ran inside and locked the door. He did not go to the living room. He went to the kitchen and sat on the floor, away from the windows. He took the journal out of his coat. His hands were shaking. He opened the book again. He began to read the entries from the month of October 1996. The notes were no longer about land. They were about fear. Mr. Blackwood wrote that he was afraid for his life. He wrote that his friends were now his enemies. Arthur realized that this journal was a record of a crime. It was the story of how the village was stolen from its people. He held the book tightly. He finally had the proof, but he knew the mayor would do anything to get this journal back. Arthur sat at the kitchen table. The small lamp made a circle of yellow light on the old leather cover of the journal. Outside, the wind moved the branches of the trees, but the house was silent. Arthur opened the book to the middle. He wanted to see the notes from the years before Mr. Blackwood died. He turned the pages carefully. The paper felt like dry skin under his fingers. He saw the name Miller on almost every page. Miller was the mayor's last name. In the journal, the notes from 1994 were very clear. At that time, Miller was not the mayor. He was a young man who wanted to build a very large hotel in the center of the village. He wanted to be rich and powerful, but the notes said that Miller had a big problem. He did not have enough money to finish the building. Arthur read the words slowly. September 12th, 1994, the journal said. Miller came to the house today. He is desperate. He needs £50,000. I agreed to help him, but only if he gave me the village land as a guarantee. Arthur leaned back in his chair. He felt a sudden shock. This meant that the mayor did not really own the land in the village centre. He had given the legal rights to Mr. Blackwood as a promise to pay back the money. When Miller's business failed a year later, the land officially belonged to Mr. Blackwood. The notes from 1996 became even more serious. Mr. Blackwood wrote about how Miller was becoming angry. July 5th, 1996. Miller is now the mayor. He is using his power to try and take the papers back. He says the village land belongs to the council, not to me. He is lying to everyone. He is talking to the doctor every day. I think they are planning something. Arthur understood the mystery now. The mayor was not a successful leader. He was a man with a massive debt. He had hidden the library records because they showed the truth about the land. If the people of the village knew that Mr. Blackwood owned the land, the mayor would lose his job and his house. He would have nothing. He stole the history of the village to save himself. Arthur whispered. He looked at the names of the bank accounts listed in the back of the journal. There were many numbers. Arthur realized that the mayor and the doctor were likely moving money from the village council into their own private accounts. They were using the land that did not belong to them to make themselves rich. Arthur felt a heavy weight in his chest. He now had the proof of a 30-year-old crime. He knew why the window was broken and why the iron key was stolen. The mayor was terrified that someone would find this leather book. Arthur closed the journal and held it tightly. He was just a retired teacher, but he was now the only person who knew the truth about the village of Oakmarrow. He knew he could not stay in the kitchen. He had to hide the journal before the morning sun arrived. Arthur did not want to hide the leather journal under his bed or in a closet. He knew the mayor's men were clever. They had already broken into his house once. He needed a place that was invisible. He looked at the fireplace in the living room. He remembered the letter from the book. The truth is hidden where the earth meets the wall. Look under the stone. He walked to the fireplace and knelt on the rug. The air near the floor was cold. He looked at the 3 stones he had examined before. He moved his hand to the 3rd stone, the one that had moved slightly when he pushed it. He took a heavy metal tool from his kitchen and began to pry at the edge of the grey stone. The stone was heavy and rough. It moved slowly, making a low, grinding noise against the floor. Arthur used all his strength. Finally, the stone tipped over. Underneath, there was not just dirt. There was a small, square hole lined with dry bricks. Inside the hole sat a small box. It was made of bright silver, but it was covered in a thin layer of grey dust. Arthur picked up the box. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. On the top of the lid, there was a beautiful carving of a flower. In the center of the flower was a tiny, round keyhole. Arthur felt a spark of excitement. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver key he had found in the birdhouse. His hand was shaking as he put the key into the lock. It was a perfect fit. He turned the key slowly to the right. He heard a soft, metallic sound from inside the box. The lock was open. Arthur lifted the lid. Inside the box, there were no gold coins or jewels. Instead, there was a stack of thin, blue papers. Arthur took them out and spread them on the floor. His eyes grew wide as he read the words. They were bank records from a bank in the big city nearby. The papers showed a list of private bank accounts. Next to each account number was a name. Arthur saw the mayor's name. He saw the doctor's name. He even saw the name of the village librarian. Beside the names were large amounts of money. The dates on the papers started in 1996 and continued for many years. "This is the village's money," Arthur said quietly. He realized that the mayor and his friends were not just hiding a debt. They were stealing the tax money from the village and putting it into these secret accounts. The land Mr. Blackwood owned was the only thing stopping them from taking everything. When Mr. Blackwood died, they hid the truth so they could keep the money moving. Arthur felt a wave of anger. These people were leaders of the village. The people trusted them. He looked at the silver box. It was the most dangerous thing in the house. If the mayor knew Arthur had this list, he would never let Arthur leave the village alive. Arthur quickly put the papers back in the box and locked it. He put the box back into the hole and pushed the heavy stone over it. He stood up and looked at the window. The sun was coming up. He was no longer just a teacher. He was a witness to a massive crime. Arthur spent the morning trying to look like a normal man. He washed his face, ate a small piece of bread, and put on his coat. He felt the weight of the secret silver box in his mind. He needed to go to the village square to buy some tape for his broken window and some tea. He also wanted to see if the village felt different now that he knew the truth about its leaders. The village square was busy. People were walking to the shops, and the sun was trying to shine through the grey clouds. Arthur walked to the hardware store. As he came out with his bag, he saw a familiar figure. The doctor was standing near the entrance of the medical clinic. He was wearing a long, professional white coat, but his face looked tired. When he saw Arthur, he did not turn away. He walked directly toward him. Arthur stopped. He felt a small pull of fear in his stomach, but he stood tall. The doctor reached him and stopped just a few centimeters away. The square was full of people, but at this moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "Good morning, Arthur," the doctor said. His voice was very quiet and very cold. "I see you are busy with your repairs." "Good morning, doctor," Arthur replied. "I'm trying to fix what was broken." The doctor looked at Arthur's eyes for a long time. He did not smile. "You are a very curious man, Arthur. In a city, curiosity is a good thing for a teacher. But in a small village like Oakmarrow, curiosity can be a disease. It can make life very difficult for a man of your age." "I am only looking for the truth," Arthur said. "Mr. Blackwood was your friend. Don't you want the truth for him?" The doctor leaned closer. Arthur could smell the sharp scent of medicine on the man's coat. The doctor's voice became a low whisper that was hard to hear over the sound of the wind. "Mr. Blackwood is gone. He is a memory. Some secrets are better left alone. Arthur. They are like old, heavy stones. If you try to move them, they might fall and crush you. You have a nice house and a quiet life. Do not throw those things away for stories from 30 years ago. Arthur felt the threat in the doctor's words. It was not a loud shout, but it was clear. The doctor was telling him that his life was in danger. Is that a medical opinion, doctor? Arthur asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The doctor did not answer the question. He stepped back and adjusted his silver glasses. I am just a man who wants peace in this village. I hope you make the right choice. Arthur, I would hate to see you have another accident at your house. The doctor turned around and walked back into his clinic. The heavy wooden door closed. Arthur stood in the middle of the square. The wind felt colder than before. He looked at the other villagers. They were smiling and talking, not knowing that their doctor and their mayor were stealing their future. Arthur gripped his shopping bag tightly. He knew now that the doctor was not just a witness. He was a guardian of the secret. Arthur walked back toward the hill, knowing that his quiet life was officially over. Arthur hurried back to his house on the hill. He kept his head down and did not look at the windows of the other houses. The doctor's words were like cold water in his ears. He felt that the village was no longer a place of peace. It was a place of traps. He entered his house and locked the door behind him. He did not go to the kitchen. He went to the living room and sat on the floor near the hidden stone in the fireplace. He took the leather journal out of his coat. He had read about the bank accounts and the land debt, but he felt he was missing something. The story in the journal was not complete. He opened the book to the very end. He wanted to read the entries from the final week of October 1996. He turned the pages slowly. The handwriting became messy and large on the last few pages. Mr. Blackwood was clearly in a hurry when he wrote them. Arthur reached the end of the written text. The last date was October 9th, 1996. Mr. Blackwood wrote about a meeting he was going to attend. But then, Arthur noticed something strange. He looked at the spine of the book. There was a thin line of white paper where the pages met the leather. He touched the edges of the paper. They were sharp and uneven. Someone had used a knife or a pair of scissors to cut the final pages out of the book. They are gone, Arthur whispered. He counted the small white edges. 5 pages were missing. These were the pages from October 10th to October 14th, the day Mr. Blackwood died. Arthur felt a deep frustration. Those 5 pages probably contained the most important information of all. They likely described the meeting, the final evidence, and perhaps the names of other people involved in the crime. Arthur sat back and thought. Who had the journal last? Martha said her father was going to a meeting. Maybe he took the pages with him. Or maybe the person who killed him, if he was killed, took the pages to hide the truth. But they did not take the whole journal. They only took the end. He looked at the jagged edges again. The cuts were very straight. This was not done in a hurry during a fight. This was done carefully. He remembered the librarian, Mrs. Gable. She had told him that the records were missing. He wondered if she knew about the missing pages too. Arthur realized that he had the bank records and the history of the debt, but he did not have the ending of the story. He needed those 5 pages to prove exactly what happened on the day of the death. Without them, the mayor could say the journal was just the stories of a confused old man. He put the journal back into the secret hole under the stone and replaced the heavy grey rock. He felt a new kind of hunger for the truth. He was no longer just protecting himself. He was fighting for Mr. Blackwood. He knew he had to find those pages. He thought about Martha's bakery and the librarian's dark office. Someone in this village was holding the end of the story in their hands. Arthur could not stay in the house. The missing pages were like a physical itch in his brain. He knew that if he didn't find them, The puzzle would never be complete. He thought about Mrs. Gable, the librarian. She had been helpful, but she also seemed to know more than she was saying. Her eyes had been full of a quiet, tired sadness when he asked about the 1996 records. The rain began to fall again, a soft, grey drizzle that turned the village into a watercolor painting. Arthur walked to the library. The old stone building was cold and silent. When he entered, the smell of old paper and wax greeted him. Mrs. Gable was not at her desk. Her reading glasses were sitting on a stack of newspapers, and a half-finished cup of tea was still steaming. Arthur walked toward the back, where the village archives were kept. He didn't go to the empty 1996 folder. Instead, he looked at the librarian's small, private desk in the corner. It was covered in ledgers and local history pamphlets. He felt like a thief, but he knew time was running out. He began to search through the drawers. In the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of blank library cards, he found a thin, manila envelope. It had no name on it, but the paper felt heavy. Arthur's heart thundered in his chest. He opened it. Inside were 5 yellowed pages, torn roughly from a leather journal. He didn't have time to read them all. He scanned the lines quickly. October 12th, 1996. I have the evidence. The doctor knows. He tried to take my bag today at the clinic. I told him the papers are safe where the blue flower grows. If something happens to me, the truth must reach the city. The last page was dated October 14th. The writing was shaky, almost unreadable. They are at the gate. Miller and the doctor. They aren't here to talk anymore. I have hidden the key in the birdhouse. May God help Martha. A floorboard creaked behind him. Arthur spun around, his heart nearly stopping. Mrs. Gable was standing in the doorway. She wasn't angry. She looked small and very, very old. I wondered how long it would take you to find them, she said softly. Her voice was trembling. Elias was my cousin. He gave me those pages right before they came for him. He told me to keep them safe. But I was a coward. Arthur. I saw what they did to his reputation. I saw how they took everything. I was afraid I would be next. You kept them for 30 years. Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. That isn't being a coward. That's being a witness. They are looking for you now, Mrs. Gable said, stepping closer and grabbing his sleeve. The mayor's assistant was here 10 minutes ago asking if you had returned. You have the whole story now, Arthur. But you must get out of Oakmarrow tonight. The doctor is not just a thief. He is a man who knows how to make people disappear quietly. Arthur tucked the pages into his inner pocket. He felt a surge of adrenaline. He had the debt records, the bank accounts, and now the final testimony of a dying man. He had everything he needed to destroy the mayor's empire. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, Arthur said. Go, she whispered, looking toward the front door. And don't take the main road. Arthur slipped out the back door of the library, his boots splashing into a puddle. He didn't head for the hill. He knew the mayor's men would be waiting for him there. Instead, he ducked into the narrow alleyways behind the village shops, moving like a shadow. He pulled the torn pages from his pocket and looked at them under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. On the back of the very last page, there was a small, hand-drawn map of the greenhouse. In the center, where the wooden table sat, Elias had drawn a tiny bluebell flower. Beneath it, written in a faint, shaky hand, was a sequence of numbers. 24, 10, 96. The code. Arthur whispered. It wasn't just a date. It was the combination to the safe he had found beneath the floorboards. The rain began to fall harder, turning the forest path into a river of mud. Arthur pushed through the soaking branches, his lungs burning. He reached the blue greenhouse, its glass panes rattling in the wind. He didn't bother with the door. He scrambled through the broken window he had used before, cutting his palm on a stray shard of glass. He didn't feel the pain. He threw the wooden board aside and knelt in the dirt. The grey steel safe waited for him. With trembling fingers, he turned the dial. Left to 24. Right to 10. Left to 96. A heavy, metallic clack echoed through the empty building. Arthur pulled the handle. The door swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges. Inside the safe sat a thick leather folder. He pulled it out and flipped it open. It was the heart of the village. He saw the original land deeds, signed and stamped with the royal seal from decades ago. These papers proved that Elias Blackwood owned the town square, the park, and the very land the town hall stood upon. Next to the deeds was a ledger titled, "The Shadow Fund," detailing every penny the mayor and the doctor had stolen since 1996. Suddenly, the greenhouse was flooded with light. Arthur blinded his eyes with his arm. A high-powered spotlight was shining through the glass walls. The sound of a car engine idling filled the air. "You really should have taken the librarian's advice, Arthur." A voice boomed from a megaphone. It was the mayor. "You've been a very busy man. But the problem with finding a treasure is that you have to live long enough to spend it." Arthur looked toward the door. The silver padlock was being cut from the outside. He was trapped. He looked at the folder in his hands, then at the broken window behind him. It was too small to jump through quickly with the heavy folder. He saw a small, rusted metal hatch in the corner of the greenhouse floor, a ventilation shaft for the old heating system. It was his only chance. He grabbed the folder, stuffed the torn journal pages inside, and scrambled toward the shadows just as the front doors swung wide. Arthur didn't think. He reacted. He dropped the heavy metal grate of the ventilation shaft and slid into the darkness just as the front doors of the greenhouse burst open. The sound of heavy boots hitting the wooden floorboards echoed like thunder in the small space. He pulled the grate back into place above his head, his fingers trembling. The shaft was narrow and smelled of damp earth and rusted iron. He lay flat on his stomach, clutching the leather folder to his chest. Above him, the beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the gaps in the grate. He was just here. A voice shouted. It was the assistant. "The safe is open. Mayor." He found the folder. "Find him." The mayor's voice roared, stripped of all its polished charm. He couldn't have gone far. "Check the perimeter. If he's still inside, burn the whole place down if you have to. We are not losing everything because of a retired schoolteacher." Arthur's heart hammered against the cold metal of the shaft. He began to crawl backward, away from the light. The space was tight, forcing him to move slowly, his elbows scraping against the rough sides. The shaft sloped downward, leading him deeper into the foundations of the old building. After what felt like an eternity, the shaft leveled out. The air became fresher, smelling of pine and rain. He saw a faint circle of moonlight ahead. The ventilation system didn't lead back to the village. It led toward the steep ravine behind the greenhouse, a place where the woods became thick and nearly impassable. He reached the end of the pipe and kicked out a small, rusted screen. He tumbled out into the wet leaves and mud, rolling down a short embankment. He lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the cold rain washing the dust from his face. High above him, he could see the blue greenhouse glowing like a lantern in the dark. Figures moved behind the glass, their flashlights dancing like angry fireflies. They were searching the floorboards. It was only a matter of time before they found the hatch. Arthur stood up, his legs feeling like lead. He had the evidence, the deeds, the ledger, and the final pages of Elias's life. But he was miles from the nearest police station in the next town, and the mayor controlled the only road out of Oakmarrow. He looked at the folder. It was soaked, but the ink was still legible. He remembered the map in the back of the journal. There was a path marked with a small star, leading through the whispering woods toward the old train tracks that hadn't been used in years. The tracks, Arthur whispered to himself. They lead to the valley station. He turned away from the light of the greenhouse and vanished into the trees. He wasn't running just to save his life anymore. He was running to ensure that the voice of Elias Blackwood was finally heard. Arthur reached the rusted iron of the old train tracks just as the first hint of dawn turned the sky a bruised purple. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his suit was ruined by mud and briars. But he clutched the leather folder to his chest like a shield. Behind him, in the distance, he heard the faint, frustrated shouts of men lost in the thicket. He didn't stop until he reached the main highway, 2 miles past the village limits. A delivery truck, hauling fresh produce to the next county, slowed to a crawl as the driver saw the bedraggled man waving his arms. "You look like you've been through a war, friend," the driver said, helping Arthur into the cab. "I have," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. "Take me to the regional police station. Please. It's a matter of life and death." The wheels turned, and as the truck climbed the ridge, Arthur looked back at Oakmarrow for the last time as a fugitive. The village was nestled in the valley, looking peaceful and quaint, hiding the rot that had eaten its heart for 30 years. 2 hours later, Arthur sat in a bright, sterile room in the regional capital. Across from him sat 2 high-ranking investigators. He laid out the leather journal, the bank records from the silver box, the stolen library pages, and the original land deeds. As they read, the room grew silent. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. The fall of the smiling faces was swift. By noon, a fleet of black police cruisers descended upon Oakmarrow. The mayor was arrested in his office while signing a contract for a new development project. The doctor was taken from his clinic, his silver glasses reflecting the flashing blue lights as he was led away in handcuffs. The assistant was found hiding near the blue greenhouse, still holding a flashlight with dead batteries. The news hit the village like a tidal wave. The shadow fund was frozen, and the money, millions of pounds, was slated to be returned to the community. A week later, Arthur stood in the village square. The sun was warm, and the air felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from the valley. He walked to the library, where Mrs. Gable was busy placing a new, thick folder into the archives. On the spine, in bold black letters, it read, 1996. The truth. He then visited the bakery. Martha was behind the counter, her eyes no longer shadowed by fear. She didn't say a word. She simply walked around the counter and hugged him. "He can finally rest," she whispered. Arthur returned to the Blackwood house on the hill. He hired workers to fix the broken window and clear the weeds from the garden. The blue greenhouse was no longer a place of secrets. The village council, now led by honest citizens, voted to turn it into a community conservatory named after Elias Blackwood. That evening, Arthur sat on his porch, watching the sunset. He held the small silver key in his hand one last time before placing it in a display case on his mantel. The house no longer felt heavy or grey. The shadows had retreated, replaced by the memories of a man who refused to let the truth stay buried. Arthur was no longer just a retired teacher. He was the man who had brought the light back to Oakmarrow. He opened his book, a simple book of poetry this time, and began to read, finally at peace in the house that was now, truly, his home. The silence that followed the arrests of Mayor Miller and Dr. Aries was not the peaceful quiet Arthur had expected. It was a heavy, expectant silence, like the pause between a lightning flash and the thunder. While the village of Oakmarrow celebrated its liberation, Arthur felt a strange, lingering restlessness. The shadow fund was gone, and the land deeds were restored. But the house on the hill still felt as though it were holding a secret behind its grey stone teeth. It was a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 10 days after the police cruisers had left. Arthur was in the master bedroom, pulling up the old, moth-eaten carpet to replace it with fresh oak planks. As he worked near the heavy mahogany wardrobe, his crowbar hit a section of the floor that sounded hollow, different from the solid thud of the other joists. He pried up the board. Tucked into a velvet-lined niche was a small, lead-lined box. It wasn't locked with a silver key or a complex dial. Instead, the lid featured a sliding puzzle of interlocking wooden gears. It took Arthur nearly an hour of patient shifting before the final gear clicked into place. The lid popped open with a puff of cedar-scented air. Inside was not money, nor deeds, but a single, heavy ring made of dark, unpolished iron and a small, hand-drawn star chart. The chart didn't look like any modern map of the night sky. The constellations were connected in strange, geometric patterns, and at the center, where the North Star should have been, was a symbol he had seen carved into the cellar door, an eye encircled by a serpent. Tucked beneath the chart was a final letter from Elias Blackwood, dated only days before his death. Unlike the other letters, this one was addressed directly to the one who follows. If you are reading this. The letter began. Then the greed of men like Miller has been defeated. But do not be fooled. The money was a distraction. A petty vice for petty men. They stole from the village. But they never understood what they were truly standing upon. The Blackwood family did not build this house to be a home. We built it to be a seal. Beneath the roots of the oak and the stones of the cellar lies the great silence. It is waking, and the iron ring is the only weight that can hold the door shut. Arthur sat on the edge of the bed, the iron ring cold in his palm. He looked out the window at the village below. He had thought he was solving a financial crime, a simple case of corruption. But as he looked at the star chart and the strange ancient ring, he realized that Elias Blackwood hadn't been a victim of the mayor. He had been a jailer, and by removing the smiling faces from the board, Arthur had unknowingly taken over the guard shift. The following morning, a black car Arthur didn't recognize pulled up the long driveway. A woman stepped out, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that looked entirely too formal for the muddy roads of Oakmarrow. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with a calculated, surgical precision. "Mr. Pendergast?" she asked as Arthur met her on the porch. "My name is Elena Thorne. I'm an architectural historian from the university. I was sent to assist with the preservation of the Blackwood estate following the legal proceedings." Arthur narrowed his eyes. The police didn't mention an architect. The police are interested in bank statements, Elena said, her gaze drifting toward the house's upper gables. The Ministry of Heritage is interested in the fact that this house is built on a foundation that predates the village by 400 years. "May I come in?" Arthur hesitated. He felt the iron ring in his pocket, heavy and cold. He didn't trust the way she looked at the stones, not with admiration, but with a hunger for data. However, he needed information. If she knew about the foundations, she might know about the great silence Elias had mentioned. He led her inside. Elena didn't look at the furniture or the newly fixed windows. She walked straight to the center of the living room and knelt, placing a small electronic device against the floorboards. It emitted a soft, rhythmic pulse. "Interesting," she whispered. "The acoustic resonance is off. There's a void beneath us that doesn't show up on the original 19th century blueprints." "The cellar," Arthur suggested. "No," she replied, looking up at him with sharp, intelligent eyes. "The cellar is 10 feet deep. This void is 60 feet down. And it's perfectly circular." She stood up and opened her portfolio, revealing a series of ground-penetrating radar scans. "I've been studying the Blackwood lineage for years. Mr. Pendergast. Elias wasn't just a hermit. He was the last of the Watchers. Do you know why the village is called Oakmarrow?" Arthur shook his head. "Because in the old tongue, it didn't mean the center of the tree," Elena said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "It meant the marrow of the earth. The ancient inhabitants believed this hill was a lung, that the earth breathed through a shaft located exactly where your fireplace sits. They built this house to act as a cork. Arthur looked at the fireplace, at the heavy stone he had moved to find the silver box. He realized then that he wasn't just living in a house, he was living on top of a lid. And Elena Thorne wasn't here to preserve history. She was here to open it. That night, for the first time since he had moved in, Arthur heard the house speak. It wasn't the creak of settling timber or the whistle of wind in the eaves. It was a rhythmic, mechanical sound, a deep, metallic thrum click that seemed to originate from deep within the walls. He took his flashlight and followed the sound. It led him to the hallway on the second floor, a narrow corridor lined with faded floral wallpaper. As he pressed his ear to the wall, he realized the sound was moving. It was a sequence of gears, vast and slow, grinding somewhere behind the plaster. The clockwork. He whispered. He remembered the sliding puzzle on the lead-lined box. The mechanism in the walls sounded like a larger version of that lock. He fetched the iron ring from his pocket. As he brought it close to the wall, the thrum clicking grew louder, more frantic. The ring was vibrating, a hum that traveled up his arm and settled in his teeth. He began to peel back a loose strip of wallpaper. Beneath the paper and the lath, he found a hidden panel of dark, polished brass. It was covered in the same iron serpent symbols. In the center of the brass panel was a small circular indentation, exactly the size of the iron ring. Arthur hesitated. Elias's letter had warned that the Great Silence was waking. Was this mechanism designed to keep it asleep, or was it the very thing that would wake it? He thought of Elena Thorne and her radar scans. She would be back in the morning with her equipment and her questions. If there was a secret in these walls, he had to find it before she did. He pressed the iron ring into the indentation. The wall didn't open. Instead, the floor beneath his feet shuddered. The sound of grinding metal intensified, echoing through the entire house like a giant waking up. Downstairs, he heard a heavy clunk, the sound of the fireplace stone shifting on its own. Arthur ran to the stairs. The living room was filled with a faint, bluish light emanating from the hearth. The 3 stones he had struggled to move were gone, retracted into the floor. In their place was a spiral staircase made of the same dark iron as the ring, descending into a darkness that seemed to swallow the light of his flashlight. From the depths of the shaft, a cold wind blew upward. It carried the scent of wet stone, ancient air, and something else, something metallic and sharp. And then came the whisper. It wasn't a human voice, but a vibration that formed words directly in his mind. The weight is lifted. The watcher is gone. Who stands at the gate? Arthur fled the house. He couldn't stay there with the blue light and the stairs that led to nowhere. He drove down the hill, the tires of his car screaming on the wet asphalt. He didn't go to the police. He went to the one person who had known the truth all along. Mrs. Gable. The library was closed, but Arthur pounded on the door until a light flickered on in the upstairs window. Mrs. Gable opened the door in her dressing gown, her face pale when she saw Arthur's frantic expression. It opened, didn't it? She asked, not needing to hear his explanation. The iron staircase. You knew. Arthur gasped, leaning against the doorframe. You gave me the missing pages, but you didn't mention a 60-foot shaft beneath my living room. Mrs. Gable sighed and stepped aside to let him in. I told you I was a coward. Arthur. I thought if I just gave you enough to stop the mayor, you'd be satisfied. I hoped the house would stay quiet for a few more years. But the Blackwood blood is thin now, and the earth is restless. She led him to the basement of the library, to a section she had kept locked during his previous visits. It wasn't full of books, but of artifacts. There were clay tablets, rusted iron tools, and a large, stone basin filled with black sand. Elias wasn't just protecting the land from Miller. She explained, pointing to a map on the wall that showed Oakmarrow as the center of a series of intersecting lines. He was protecting the lay point. The great silence isn't a monster, Arthur. It's a vacuum. A place where time and sound don't exist. If the shaft is opened, it drains the life from everything around it. The trees wither. The people become empty. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a heavy leather glove. The ring is a key, but it's also a regulator. You can't just close the door. You have to balance the pressure. If you don't, the whole hill will collapse into the void. How do I balance it? Arthur asked. There is a second ring, Mrs. Gable said, her eyes fixed on the black sand in the basin. Elias hid it in the one place he knew the mayor would never look. The old schoolhouse. Under the teacher's desk. He said if the time ever came, the teacher would know what to do. Arthur felt a chill. He had been a teacher for 30 years. It wasn't a coincidence that he had bought the Blackwood house. Elias hadn't just left the house to a stranger. He had chosen a successor with the right temperament. I have to go back, Arthur said, his fear replaced by a grim sense of duty. Take this, Mrs. Gable said, handing him a small vial of mercury. If the liquid begins to float, the vacuum is too strong. You'll have 5 minutes to get out before the air is sucked from your lungs. Arthur arrived at the old Oakmarrow schoolhouse just as the clouds parted to reveal a moon that hung low and unnaturally red in the sky. The schoolhouse was a ruin, its windows shattered and its bell tower leaning at a precarious angle. It had been closed since the 1990s, another victim of the mayor's budget cuts. He stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of chalk dust and rotting wood. His flashlight beam danced over overturned desks and piles of moldering textbooks. He made his way to the front of the classroom, where the teacher's platform sat like a ghost stage. The desk was a heavy oak beast, bolted to the floor. Arthur knelt and felt beneath the footwell. His fingers brushed against a small, cold metal latch. He pulled it, and a secret compartment swung open. Inside lay the second ring. This one was made of bright, polished gold, etched with symbols of stars and suns. As soon as Arthur picked it up, the iron ring in his other pocket began to vibrate in harmony. The two metals, one dark and heavy, one bright and light, seemed to pull toward each other like magnets. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the classroom floor. "I'll take that, Arthur," a voice said. Elena Thorne stood in the doorway. She was no longer wearing her charcoal suit. She was dressed in tactical gear, and in her hand was a sleek, professional-grade tranquilizer pistol. Behind her, two men Arthur didn't recognize moved into the room. "You don't understand what you're doing," Arthur said, clutching the gold ring. "This isn't an archaeological find. It's a seal. If you open that shaft, you'll destroy the village." "Destroy it?" "No." Elena smiled, a cold, hungry expression. "We're going to harvest it. The energy produced by a temporal vacuum is worth more than all the land in this county. The Great Silence is a battery, Mr. Pendergast, and I have the equipment to tap it." "Elias died to keep this secret," Arthur said. Elias was an old man afraid of the dark. Elena countered. "I'm a woman who sees the light. Give me the ring, or my associates will take it from your cold, unmoving hands." Arthur looked at the red moon through the broken window. He felt the vibration of the two rings, the iron and the gold. He realized then that he couldn't just keep the door closed. He had to finish the mechanism Elias had started. He didn't give her the ring. Instead, he threw a heavy glass inkwell at the nearest mercenary and dived through the window into the night. Arthur landed in the damp mulch outside the schoolhouse, the impact jolting his knees. He didn't wait to check for broken bones. Behind him, he heard the heavy boots of the mercenaries hitting the floorboards and the sharp, clinical voice of Elena Thorne barking orders. He scrambled toward the tree line, the iron and gold rings clinking together in his pocket like a frantic heartbeat. The Whispering Woods lived up to their name that night. As Arthur dove into the thicket, the wind sighed through the pines, creating a cacophony of hushed voices that seemed to mimic his own panicked breathing. He knew these woods better than the outsiders, thanks to the countless hours he'd spent studying Elias's hand-drawn maps. He knew that 50 yards to the east, the ground dropped into a limestone crevice that was invisible under the moonlight. "Spread out," one of the mercenaries shouted. The beam of a high-powered tactical light swept over the ferns just inches from Arthur's head. He pressed himself into the shadow of a rotting log, tasting the metallic tang of fear and the earthy scent of wet moss. He reached into his pocket and touched the 2 rings. The vibration had changed. It was no longer a frantic hum. It was a rhythmic pulse, timed perfectly with the thrumming he had heard in the walls of the house. The rings were communicating, seeking the center of the seal. He realized he couldn't just run away. The longer he held the rings away from the house, the more the great silence would pull at the foundations of the village. He felt a sudden, dizzying sensation, like the ground beneath him was becoming thin, a mere sheet of paper over an infinite drop. He saw his chance when the 2 mercenaries drifted too far apart, lured by the sound of a startled fox in the underbrush. Arthur stood and moved with a silent grace he didn't know he possessed. He bypassed the main trail, instead following a dry creek bed that led directly to the back edge of his own property. As he climbed the final ridge, he looked back. A black SUV was tearing up the road toward his house, its headlights cutting through the fog like the eyes of a predator. Elena was heading for the source. She didn't need the rings to start her harvest. She only needed them to control it. If she reached the shaft first, she would force the door open with her machines, and the resulting vacuum would swallow Oakmarrow before she could even turn her equipment on. Arthur reached the perimeter of his garden. The air here was different, colder, and strangely devoid of sound. The crickets had gone silent. The rustle of the leaves had stopped. Even the rain seemed to fall in slow motion. The great silence was no longer whispering. It was inhaling. The Blackwood house stood like a dark sentinel against the red moon. The blue light from the fireplace was now visible through the windows, pulsing with a slow, sickly heartbeat. Arthur crept toward the back porch, but he stopped when he saw the front door hang wide open. Elena's men were already inside. He stayed in the shadows of the overgrown hydrangeas. He could hear the heavy clatter of equipment being moved, metal canisters, thick cables, and the hum of a portable generator. They were setting up around the hearth. "The pressure is dropping," he heard Elena say from inside. Her voice was amplified by the acoustics of the stone hall. "We're seeing a 0.4 deviation in the local gravity constant. It's perfect. Prepare the bore drills. If we can't find the key, we'll shatter the lock." Arthur knew he had minutes, perhaps seconds. He remembered the vial of mercury Mrs. Gable had given him. He pulled it out. The silver liquid inside was no longer resting at the bottom. It was forming tiny, perfect spheres that hovered in the center of the glass. The vacuum was intensifying. He didn't go through the door. Instead, he remembered a detail from the blueprints Elena had shown him, the acoustic resonance she had mentioned. The house was designed as a giant ear, and the cellar was its drum. He hurried to the small wooden hatch at the base of the foundation, the one leading to the coal chute. He slid down the chute, landing in a pile of ancient, dusty coal. The cellar was freezing, the walls coated in a layer of frost despite the mild evening. In the center of the room, the iron staircase he had seen in the living room descended through the ceiling and continued down into the floor. The stairs weren't just a way down. They were the central spindle of a massive clockwork machine. As Arthur approached the staircase, the rings in his pocket became so hot they burned through the fabric. He took them out, holding the iron ring in his left hand and the gold in his right. The air began to scream. It wasn't a sound, but a pressure in his ears that threatened to burst his eardrums. He looked down the shaft. Far below, He saw a swirling vortex of white mist and absolute blackness, the Great Silence. It was beautiful and terrifying, a piece of the primordial void trapped beneath the English soil. Arthur. He turned. Elena Thorne was standing at the top of the cellar stairs, her silhouette framed by the blue light of the living room. She held her tranquilizer pistol leveled at his chest, but her hand was shaking. Even she could feel the power of the void waking beneath them. "Give me the rings," she whispered. "We can stabilize it together. We can change the world. You want to harvest the void," Arthur said, his voice sounding hollow in the thinning air. "But the void doesn't give. It only takes." Elena fired. The dart hissed through the air, but as it crossed the threshold of the iron staircase, it didn't hit Arthur. It slowed, then began to orbit the shaft, caught in the strange gravitational pull of the vacuum. It circled once, twice, and then vanished into the darkness below. Elena's eyes widened. The mercenaries behind her backed away, sensing the unnatural physics at play. Arthur didn't wait for a second shot. He stepped onto the iron stairs. As his foot touched the metal, the staircase began to rotate. The grinding noise he had heard in the walls was now deafening, a symphony of ancient gears turning in the deep earth. He began to descend, the stairs spiraling downward into the throat of the hill. "Stop him!" Elena screamed, but her men refused to move. The blue light was now so bright it blinded them, and the wind rushing into the shaft was pulling furniture toward the hole. Arthur spiraled down. The walls of the shaft were lined with shelves, not of books, but of jars. Thousands of glass jars, each containing a single, flickering spark of light. He realized with a shudder what they were. These were the memories the house had collected over centuries. Every sound, every word spoken in Oakmarrow, was being stored here to prevent the vacuum from consuming the town's history. The further he went, the quieter it became. The roar of the machinery faded into a low hum, then into nothing. He was entering the Great Silence. He reached a landing 40 feet down. Here, the shaft opened into a vast, circular chamber. In the center was a giant orrery, a model of the solar system made of brass and bone. But it wasn't the sun at the center. It was a sphere of pure, unreflective blackness. The vacuum. The orrery was broken. Several of the planet arms were bent, and the central spindle was missing its counterweights. Arthur looked at the two rings in his hands. He saw two sockets on the main control console, one etched with the symbol of the serpent and the other with the star. He stepped toward the console, but his feet felt heavy, as if the floor were made of magnets. The mercury in the vial shattered the glass and floated away into the dark. He was losing time. He was losing air. He reached the console and pressed the iron ring into the serpent socket. A deep, resonant chime echoed through the chamber. The outer rings of the orrery began to spin, slowing the vortex. But the inner core was still unstable, wobbling violently. He raised the gold ring. "Wait." He turned. Elena had followed him. She was pale, her nose bleeding from the pressure change, but she was driven by a fanaticism that defied the void. She reached for the gold ring, her fingers brushing Arthur's. "If you put that in, the cycle completes," she gasped. "The power will be locked away forever. Think of what we could do with this." "I'm thinking of what we must do," Arthur said. He slammed the gold ring into the star socket. The moment the gold ring clicked into place, the chamber was transformed. The blue light vanished, replaced by a warm, golden radiance that spilled from the orrery. The grinding of gears stopped instantly, replaced by a sound like a single, perfect note played on a cello. The black sphere at the center of the room didn't disappear, but it stopped growing. The brass arms of the machine began to move in a complex, beautiful dance, shielding the vacuum and channeling its pull into a steady, controlled hum. The Great Silence was no longer a threat. It was a heart, beating in rhythm with the earth. Elena fell to her knees, staring at the machine. The hunger in her eyes was gone, replaced by a profound, crushing awe. It's a clock," she whispered. "A clock for the world." Arthur felt to sudden clarity. He understood now why the Blackwoods were called Watchers. They weren't just jailers. They were maintainers of the balance. The vacuum was a natural part of the world. The space between thoughts, the silence between notes. It was necessary, but it had to be measured. The air returned to the chamber, sweet and cool. Arthur looked up. High above, he could see the circle of his living room floor. The mercenaries were gone, fled in terror. "We have to go," Arthur said, reaching out a hand to Elena. "I can't leave it," she said, her voice trembling. "Now that I've seen it, the rest of the world is just noise. If you stay, you become part of the storage," Arthur warned, pointing to the jars of light on the walls. "Is that the legacy you want? To be a spark in a jar?" That seemed to wake her. She took his hand, and together they climbed the rotating stairs. As they reached the cellar, the iron staircase began to retract. The heavy stone blocks in the living room slid back into place, sealing the shaft with a final, heavy thud. Arthur stood in his living room, the sun beginning to rise over the hills of Oakmarrow. The house was quiet, truly quiet. The whispering in the walls had stopped. The blue light was gone. He looked at his hands. They were stained with coal dust and blood, but they were steady. Elena Thorne stood by the broken window, looking out at the village. She didn't look like a predator anymore. She looked like a woman who had seen the edge of the universe and realized how small she was. "What now?" she asked. "Now," Arthur said, "we tell a different story. The mayor and the doctor were the distraction. The truth stays here. It stays with the Watcher." The weeks following the Red Moon were a blur of reconstruction and quiet transition. Elena Thorne officially resigned from the university, citing a change in research focus. She didn't leave Oakmarrow, however. She bought a small cottage at the base of the hill and began to work with Mrs. Gable to digitize the Blackwood archives. The real ones, the ones that spoke of ley lines and celestial mechanics. The village of Oakmarrow flourished. With the Shadow Fund money returned, the park was rebuilt, the school reopened, and the Blue Greenhouse became a center for rare botanical research. The people felt a strange sense of well-being, a clarity of mind they hadn't known for decades. They didn't know about the orrery beneath the hill, but they felt its balance. Arthur remained in the house. He was no longer a retired teacher in the eyes of the village. He was a respected elder, a man of quiet wisdom. He spent his days in the garden, tending to the ancient oaks. He knew that the rings were still there, beneath the floorboards, keeping the great silence in check. But he also knew that he wouldn't be the last. One evening, while sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, he saw a young girl from the village, the daughter of the local blacksmith, standing by the gate. She was looking at the house with a curious, knowing expression. "Is it true the stones talk?" she asked. Arthur smiled. He felt the iron rings echo in his mind, a gentle, steady pulse. "They don't talk, Sarah. They listen. And as long as someone is here to listen back, the world stays in balance." He invited her in for a glass of lemonade. As she sat in the living room, her eyes drifted to the 3 stones in front of the fireplace. She didn't know why, but she reached out and touched them. Arthur watched her, a sense of peace washing over him. The Blackwood legacy wasn't about blood. It was about the burden of the secret, and the strength to carry it. The sun set over Oakmarrow, casting long, golden shadows across the valley. The smiling faces were gone, replaced by honest ones. And deep beneath the earth, the great silence beat like a drum, a perfect, quiet heart for a town that had finally found its voice. Peace in Oakmarrow was a delicate thing, like a glass bird. For a year, the balance held. Arthur grew accustomed to the rhythmic hum that occasionally vibrated through the floorboards, a reminder that the orrery was still spinning, still keeping the vacuum at bay. But on the anniversary of the red moon, the hum changed. It became a stutter, a faltering heartbeat that sent ripples through the village. It started at the bakery. Martha was pulling a tray of bread from the oven when the lights flickered and died. It wasn't just the electricity. The very light from the windows seemed to dim, as if the sun were being obscured by a thick, invisible veil. For 5 seconds, the entire village was plunged into a grey, soundless world. Then, as quickly as it had come, it vanished. Arthur felt it the most. He was in the garden when the stutter occurred. He watched as a vibrant red rose turned grey and crumbled into ash in a matter of seconds. Time had skipped. He hurried to the basement. He didn't need the rings to see that something was wrong. The stones in the living room were glowing again, but the light wasn't blue or gold. It was a frantic, strobing white. He pulled up the stone and descended the iron stairs, which were now rotating at a terrifying speed. When he reached the orrery chamber, he found Elena already there. She had used a secret entrance she'd discovered in the ravine. She was staring at the central spindle. One of the glass jars on the wall had shattered, and the spark of light inside, a memory from the year 1842, was being sucked into the vacuum. "The jars are failing," Elena shouted over the rising wind. "The seal is holding, but the storage system is overloaded. It's too much data. Arthur, the history of the village is too heavy for the machine." Arthur looked at the thousands of jars. He realized that the orrery didn't just balance the vacuum. It fed it. The great silence required a sacrifice of information to remain stable. For centuries, the Blackwoods had fed the vacuum with the village's memories, preserving the present by sacrificing the past. But the modern world, with its noise and its constant stream of information, was moving too fast. "We need to purge the system," Elena said, her eyes fixed on the control console. "If we don't release some of the older memories, the vacuum will take the current ones. It will take the people." "Arthur, but if we purge them, they're gone forever," Arthur argued. "The history of Oakmarrow, the families, the stories, it will all be erased. Better a town with no past than a town with no future," Elena countered. She reached for the lever, but Arthur stopped her. He saw a third socket on the console, one he hadn't noticed before. It was shaped like a human hand. The handprint socket was worn smooth by the palms of generations of Blackwoods. Arthur realized then that the machine wasn't purely mechanical. It required a biological interface, a conduit to filter the memories. The Watcher wasn't just a guard. They were the processor. "It's not about purging," Arthur whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "It's about sharing. The machine is struggling because it's trying to hold all the memories in a vacuum. It needs to release them back into the earth, but it needs a mind to bridge the gap." "Arthur, no," Elena said, seeing his intent. "You don't know what that will do to you. Thousands of years of memories passing through your consciousness in a second. It'll burn you out." "Elias didn't die of old age," Arthur said, looking at the handprint. "He died because he was the bridge. Miller and the doctor thought they were killing him, but he was already fading. He was holding back the tide until someone else could take the weight." The stutter happened again. Above them, he could hear the screams of the villagers as their own memories began to slip away. Martha would forget her father. Sarah would forget the house. The village would become a collection of empty shells. Arthur didn't hesitate. He placed his hand on the cold brass plate. The world vanished. There was no chamber, no Elena, no machine. There was only a flood of light and sound. Arthur felt himself expanding, his mind stretching across centuries. He saw the first settlers carving the stone. He felt the cold of the great frost of 1683. He heard the laughter of children playing in the square 100 years before he was born. It was beautiful, but it was agonizing. Every joy and every sorrow of Oakmarrow was flowing through him, a river of fire. He felt his own identity slipping away, becoming just another spark in the jar. He was no longer Arthur Pendergast. He was the village itself. In the center of the storm, he saw the vacuum. It wasn't a monster. It was a hungry, lonely void that just wanted to be filled. Arthur didn't fight it. Instead, he opened his mind and gave it what it wanted. He channeled the memories not into the void, but through it, using the vacuum's power to broadcast them back into the very soil of the hill. The pressure began to lift. The white strobe light softened into a steady, golden glow. The orrery slowed its frantic spin, settling into a deep, majestic rhythm. Through the haze of the connection, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Elena. She had joined him, placing her hand over his on the plate. She was helping him carry the weight. Together, they directed the flow, weaving the past into the present. When Arthur finally pulled his hand away, he collapsed onto the stone floor. His hair, which had been grey, was now stark white. His eyes felt as though they had seen the birth of stars. Elena sat beside him, gasping for air, her face etched with a newfound reverence. The chamber was silent. The jars on the walls were no longer flickering. They were empty. The sparks of light had been released. Is it over?" Elena asked. "For now," Arthur whispered. "The memories are back where they belong. In the hearts of the people, not in glass jars." They climbed the stairs to the surface. As they stepped into the living room, they saw the sun rising. It was the most beautiful thing Arthur had ever seen. He walked to the window and looked down at the village. People were standing in the streets, hugging each other. They were crying, but they were smiling. They remembered. They remembered everything, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the crimes. The Shadow Fund era was no longer a hidden secret. It was a part of their collective story, a lesson learned. But there was a side effect. Arthur could hear them. Not their words, but their echoes. Every person in Oakmarrow now carried a piece of the vacuum's clarity. They were more connected, more aware of each other. The village had become a true community, bound by a shared history that was no longer locked in a cellar. "You changed them," Elena said, standing beside him. "We changed them," Arthur corrected. "But the cost was high. The machine is stable, but the jars are gone. From now on, the Watcher doesn't just watch the machine. The Watcher has to watch the people." He looked at his hand. The mark of the serpent and the star was now etched into his skin, a permanent brand of his office. He realized that the Blackwood legacy had evolved. It was no longer about isolation and secrets. It was about stewardship. "I need to start a school," Arthur said suddenly. "A school?" Elena asked. "A place to teach the next generation how to handle the clarity." Arthur explained. "If everyone remembers everything, they need to know how to forgive. Otherwise, the village will tear itself apart with old grudges." Elena nodded. "I'll help you. I think I've had enough of harvesting history. I'd rather help write the next chapter." As they stood there, a soft hum vibrated through the floorboards. It was a happy sound, the sound of a heart that was finally full. The School for Clarity opened in the old greenhouse, now restored to its full glory with shimmering glass and thriving bluebells. Arthur and Elena taught the children of Oakmarrow not just mathematics and history, but empathy and the weight of the echo. The village became a beacon of peace in the county, a place where no secret could survive and no lie could take root. However, the light of Oakmarrow did not go unnoticed. One rainy afternoon, A group of men in dark suits arrived in a fleet of black vans. They weren't mercenaries like Elena's former associates. They were government officials from a department that had no name. They were led by a man named Director Vane, a man with a smile that was even colder than Mayor Miller's had ever been. "Mr. Pendergast," Vane said, standing in the living room of the Blackwood house. "We've been monitoring the anomalous social stability of this village. Your results are unprecedented. We'd like to see the source." Arthur stood his ground. "There is no source, Director. Only a community that has learned to live with its past." Vane laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Don't play games with me. We have satellite readings of the energy spike from last year. We know about the lay point. We know about the vacuum. And we've decided that Oakmarrow is too important a resource to be left in the hands of a retired teacher." He produced a document, a federal seizure order. "This property, and everything beneath it, now belongs to the state. You have 24 hours to vacate." Elena stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "You can't seize a lay point. It's not a piece of land. It's a biological equilibrium. If you interfere with the orrery, you'll collapse the entire region." "We have our own experts," Vane said, signaling his men to begin unloading heavy equipment. "And we have a much larger jar to fill. Imagine a city where everyone is as clear as your villagers. Imagine a country under perfect control." Arthur felt the rings in his pocket pulse with a warning. The vacuum was reacting to Vane's presence. It sensed the greed, the desire for control. The Great Silence didn't like being used as a tool for power. "You're making a mistake," Arthur said quietly. "I've heard that before," Vane replied. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a world to fix." Arthur and Elena were escorted from the house. As they stood at the gate, Arthur looked at the villagers gathering in the square. They felt the intrusion. The echo was vibrating with fear and anger. "They're going to open the shaft," Elena whispered. "They don't know about the balance. They think it's a battery." "They're looking for a battery," Arthur said, his white hair whipping in the wind. "But they're going to find a mirror." Director Vane's team didn't waste time. They used hydraulic rams to shatter the 3 stones in the living room. They didn't wait for the gears to turn. They forced the mechanism. The screech of tortured metal echoed through the hills, a sound that made the birds flee the trees in a black cloud. Arthur and Elena watched from the village square. They could see the blue light erupting from the house, far brighter and more violent than before. It wasn't the steady glow of the orrery. It was the jagged lightning of a system under attack. "They've bypassed the regulators," Elena said, her voice trembling. "They're trying to pull the vacuum directly into their collectors. They're going to tear the hole wide open." Suddenly, the village was hit by a wave of psychic feedback. Because the villagers were clear, they felt everything Vane's men were doing. They felt the cold, the emptiness, the hunger of the void. But they also felt Vane's own thoughts, his arrogance, his cruelty, his disregard for human life. "Look," Arthur said, pointing to the crowd. The villagers weren't running away. They were walking toward the hill. Hundreds of them. Martha, Sarah, the librarian, all moving in a silent, purposeful line. They weren't armed with pitchforks or torches. They were armed with the echo. As they reached the perimeter of the Blackwood estate, Vane's guards leveled their weapons. "Stop! Stay back!" The villagers didn't stop. They simply looked at the guards. And as they looked, the guards began to drop their weapons. They were being flooded with the echo. Thousands of lives, thousands of memories, thousands of truths hitting them all at once. The guards weren't being attacked. They were being overwhelmed by reality. Inside the house, Director Vane was screaming. He had connected his collectors to the vacuum, but instead of energy, he was receiving the mirror. The vacuum was reflecting his own empty soul back at him, amplified 1,000,000 times. He saw every lie he'd ever told, every life he'd ever ruined. He was being consumed by his own silence. Arthur ran into the house, Elena at his side. The living room was a vortex of papers and debris. Vane was slumped against the hearth, his eyes wide and vacant. His equipment was melting, the metal turning into grey dust. "Shut it down," Vane croaked, his voice a ghost of itself. "Make it stop. The noise, the truth, it's too loud." Arthur didn't shut it down. He walked to the console, which was glowing with a blinding white light. He placed his hand on the plate, and he called out to the villagers outside. "Help me," he thought. And the village answered. Through the connection of the clarity, Arthur felt the minds of every man, woman, and child in Oakmarrow. They joined him in the cellar, not in body, but in spirit. They formed a human shield of memory and emotion around the vacuum, acting as a natural regulator that Vane's machines could never replicate. Together, they pushed back. They didn't push the vacuum down, they pushed the intruders out. The mirror effect intensified. Vane and his men were literally unable to remain in the presence of so much truth. They fled the house, stumbling and weeping, their minds shattered by the sudden realization of their own insignificance. As the last of the black vans sped away from Oakmarrow, never to return, Arthur and the villagers worked together to stabilize the orrery. This time, it wasn't a burden for one man. It was a shared responsibility. The vacuum was balanced by the collective consciousness of the community. The blue light faded. The storm in the living room subsided. The house was once again a house. But it was different now. The seal was no longer a secret kept by a hermit on a hill. It was a pact between the earth and the people. Oakmarrow had become something new, a living laypoint. In the aftermath, Arthur sat with Elena on the porch. Vane's equipment was being hauled away by the local blacksmith to be melted down into garden tools. The government would never come back. They were too afraid of the psychic contagion of honesty that Oakmarrow represented. "We can't keep this here forever," Elena said, looking at the peaceful village. "Others will hear. Other laypoints will start to wake up. The world is getting noisier. Arthur, the great silence is going to be needed in more places than just one hill in England." Arthur looked at the mark on his hand. It was fading, spreading into a faint pattern that looked like a map of the stars. "I know. The school, it's not just for the children of Oakmarrow, is it?" "No." Elena smiled. "It's for the next watchers. From everywhere." Arthur looked out at the horizon. He saw a young man walking up the road, carrying a backpack and a worn notebook. He didn't look like a local. He looked like someone who had been searching for something he couldn't name. "Here comes the first one," Arthur said. He stood up and walked to the gate to welcome the stranger. The Blackwood house was no longer a fortress or a prison. It was a doorway, and Arthur Pendergast, the retired teacher, was ready to teach the world how to listen to the silence. The young man at the gate was named Julian. He had traveled from across the ocean, led by dreams of a house that breathed and a village where the air tasted like truth. He was the first of many who would find their way to Oakmarrow, drawn by the subtle pulse of the living laypoint. "I feel it," Julian said, his eyes wide as he stepped onto the porch. "The hum. It's like the world is finally in tune." Arthur spent the next few months teaching Julian the basics of the echo. He showed him the orrery, not as a machine to be feared, but as a masterpiece of celestial balance. He taught him that the great silence wasn't an ending, but a space for new beginnings. But as Julian learned, a new problem arose. The clarity of Oakmarrow was starting to spread. People who visited the village for a day went home changed. They found they could no longer lie to their spouses. They found they had to settle old debts. The infection of honesty, as the papers started to call it, was disrupting the social fabric of the surrounding towns. The world isn't ready for this much truth. The doctor warned Arthur one day in the square. People need their little lies to survive. Arthur, you're taking away their armor. Armor only protects you from others. Arthur replied, it doesn't protect you from yourself. But what happens when the armor is all they have? The doctor asked. Arthur realized the doctor was right. The vacuum was pulling at the world's secrets too quickly. He needed to find a way to throttle the clarity, to make it a choice rather than an atmosphere. He and Elena returned to the orrery. They discovered that the gold ring, the star key, could be used to modulate the frequency of the echo. By turning it slightly to the left, they could create a buffer, a zone of privacy that allowed people to hold onto their inner lives while still remaining connected to the whole. It's about boundaries, Elena said, adjusting the brass dial. The vacuum shouldn't consume the individual. It should only consume the walls between them. As they worked, Julian watched, taking notes. He saw the complexity of the balance. He saw that being a watcher wasn't about power. It was about constant, microscopic adjustments to the soul of the world. One night, Arthur found Julian in the cellar, staring at the orrery. Are you ready? Arthur asked. For what? Julian asked. To take the mark. Arthur said, showing him the serpent and the star on his own palm. I'm tired, Julian. The history is heavy, and the world is getting louder. I need to know there's someone to hold the gate when I'm gone. The transition of the Watcher was not a simple thing. It required the presence of both the iron and the gold, and the willing participation of the earth itself. Arthur, Elena, and Julian gathered in the chamber on the night of the equinox. The orrery was spinning with a majestic, slow grace, the golden light reflecting off the jars that were now being refilled with shared light, not secret memories, but collective wisdom. Hold the rings, Arthur commanded. Julian took the iron ring in his left hand and the gold in his right. He trembled as the vibrations hit him, the weight of centuries pressing against his chest. The iron is the earth, Arthur chanted, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. The weight of the past, the solidity of truth. The gold is the star, the light of the future, the clarity of the soul. Together, they are the balance. Arthur placed his hands over Julian's. He began to transfer the echo. It was a gentler process than the one he had endured during the Red Moon. Because the village was now a part of the machine, the burden was distributed. Julian didn't see a fire. He saw a tapestry. He saw the threads of 1,000 lives weaving together into a single, beautiful pattern. The mark began to form on Julian's palms. The serpent on the left, the star on the right. Suddenly, the vacuum at the center of the room flared. It wasn't an attack. It was a greeting. A single, pure spark of white light drifted from the void and settled into Julian's chest. It was the gift of the silence, the ability to find peace in the midst of any storm. Arthur felt the weight lift from his own shoulders. The white in his hair didn't change, but the exhaustion in his bones vanished. He was no longer the bridge. He was just Arthur again. It's done, Elena whispered, tears in her eyes. Julian stood up, his eyes glowing with a soft, inner light. He looked at the orrery, then up at the shaft leading to the house. He knew every stone, every gear, every heartbeat of Oakmarrow. I see it now, Julian said. It's not a prison. It's a song. Arthur walked to the stairs. He felt lighter than he had in years. He realized that his journey, which had started with a dusty box of books and a broken window, had led him to the very heart of existence. He had been a teacher, a detective, a jailer, and a bridge. Now, he was simply a gardener. The roses need pruning, Arthur said to Elena as they climbed back to the living room. And the world needs more watchers. She replied, looking at the glowing mark on Julian's hands below. Years passed. The Blackwood house became the Oakmarrow Academy for the Balanced Mind. Julian served as the headmaster, while Arthur and Elena acted as advisors, living out their days in a quiet cottage on the edge of the woods. The academy didn't just teach the locals. It became a sanctuary for people from all over the world who felt the static of modern life too heavily. They came to Oakmarrow to learn how to listen to the silence, how to find the orrery within themselves. But the world outside was changing. The great noise, the chaos of the digital age, the fragmentation of truth, the rising tides of anger, was putting an immense strain on all the lay points of the earth. Oakmarrow was holding, but other points in distant lands were starting to fracture. One morning, Julian received a message. It wasn't a letter or a phone call. It was a vibration in the echo. A lay point in the high mountains of the east had collapsed. A great silence had turned into a great devouring, and an entire valley was being erased from time. "We have to go," Julian said, standing in Arthur's garden. "The orrery in Oakmarrow can act as a master regulator, but we need to physically be there to install the secondary seals." Arthur looked at his pruning shears. He was 80 years old now, his face a map of 1,000 stories. "I'm too old for mountain climbing." "Julian, you don't need to climb," Julian said, holding out a small, glass vial. Inside was a swirling mist of blue and gold. "We've learned how to transport the echo. We can project the balance. But we need the master's signature to authorize the link." Arthur realized what this meant. Oakmarrow was no longer just a village. It was the mother node for a global network of peace. The Blackwood legacy was going viral. He placed his thumb on the vial. The mark of the serpent and the star, though faded, still held the authority of the Watcher. The vial glowed with a sudden, intense light. "Go," Arthur said. "Take the light to the mountains. Tell them that the silence isn't something to be feared. It's the place where we find each other." As Julian and a team of graduates departed, Arthur sat on his bench and watched the sunset. He felt the echo expanding, reaching out across oceans and continents. He felt the great silence under his feet pulse with a deep, satisfied hum. The machine was no longer just beneath his house. It was everywhere. He closed his eyes and listened. He didn't hear the wind or the birds. He heard the heart of the world, beating in perfect, measured time. Arthur Pendergast sat on the porch of the Blackwood house. He was nearly 90 now, and the world had changed beyond recognition. The Oakmarrow method was now taught in universities, and the great noise of the early 21st century had finally begun to subside into a global era of clarity. The Blackwood house was no longer a place of mystery. It was a place of pilgrimage. People came from everywhere just to sit on the grass and breathe the balanced air. They didn't see the iron stairs or the orrery, but they felt the peace that Elias Blackwood had died to protect. Elena had passed away a few years prior, leaving behind a library of knowledge that would guide the Watchers for centuries. Julian was now an elder himself, training the 5th generation of students. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Arthur felt a familiar presence. It wasn't a ghost, but a resonance. He saw a figure standing by the oak tree, a tall, thin man with a serious face and dark, deep eyes. "Elias," Arthur whispered. The figure didn't speak, but he smiled. He looked at the thriving village, the glass greenhouse, the children laughing in the square. He looked at Arthur's hands, which were still steady despite his age. He nodded once, a gesture of profound gratitude and relief. The debt was paid. The seal was secure. The smiling faces were now real. Arthur felt a sudden, gentle tug in his chest. It wasn't painful. It was like a final gear clicking into place. The iron ring and the gold ring, which he kept on a chain around his neck, grew warm one last time. He leaned his head back against the chair. He looked at the first star appearing in the twilight sky. He thought about the dusty box of books, the stolen key, the blue light in the fireplace, and the thousands of jars of light. He thought about the great silence and realized that he was finally ready to join it. But he wouldn't be lost. He would be a spark in the shared jar. He would be a part of the echo, a memory that would help the next watcher find their way. The truth, Arthur murmured, his voice a soft sigh in the evening air, is finally home. He closed his eyes. The hum of the earth rose up to meet him, a beautiful, eternal cello note that carried him into the dark. Below the house, the orrery spun on, its brass arms dancing in the golden light. The serpent and the star remained in their sockets, and the great silence beat steady and strong. The village of Oakmarrow slept in peace, guarded by a legacy that would never fade. The retired teacher had finished his lesson, and the world was finally, beautifully, quiet.